Charlotte Whitmore did not cry when her father told her she had to go. She sat at the kitchen table, hands folded, spine straight, and she listened. She nodded. She said, "Yes, sir." And when he finished explaining what he needed from her, what he expected her body and her pride to endure on his behalf, she stood up, walked to her room, packed one bag, and did not look back. She had spent 25 years learning how to carry things other people put down. One more burden would not break her. If this story moves you, if you have ever carried something that was never yours to carry, subscribe to this channel, hit that notification bell, and follow Charlotte's journey all the way to the end. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The wagon ride from Millhaven to Carter Ranch took the better part of the morning, and Charlotte spent most of it watching the Montana sky. It was the kind of blue that had no mercy in it, wide and open and indifferent to everything happening beneath it. She liked that about Montana skies. They didn't judge. They just stretched on endlessly, as if the world below had nothing to do with them. She had brought one bag, a dress she'd mended 3 times, a small book of recipes her mother had left her, a tin of hard candy she'd bought in town with the last few coins she'd saved from washing laundry for neighbors. She had not brought hope. Hope, she had learned early, was a luxury for women who weighed less. The driver, old Pete Hadley, who ran the postal route and kept his eyes on the road, hadn't said a word to her since Millhaven. He'd taken her father's coin without a word. He hadn't offered to help with her bag. She hadn't expected him to. When the wagon finally crested the ridge and Carter Ranch spread out below them, Charlotte gripped the edge of the buckboard with both hands. Not from fear. From something closer to the feeling you get when you realize a thing is real, truly real, and there is no more time for preparing. She had heard about William Carter her whole life. Everyone in Millhaven had. He was the kind of man that small towns build mythology around, the rancher who had more acres than sense. The cowboy who had turned down 3 rich men's daughters and never explained why, the man who kept to himself and ran his land like a kingdom that didn't require a queen. They said he was cold. They said he was proud. They said he had eyes that could make a dishonest man confess just by looking at him long enough. What they said about Charlotte was different. Too much. That was the word they used most often. Too much woman. Too much weight. Too much of everything that made men uncomfortable and women cruel. She had been hearing it since she was 9 years old, when Mrs. Alderman had pulled her mother aside at church and suggested very kindly that Charlotte ought to eat less at supper. She was 25 now, and the word had followed her like a shadow that grew longer in the afternoon. Pete Hadley pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the main gate, and Charlotte climbed down before he could say a word. She lifted her own bag. She straightened her dress. She walked toward the gate with her chin at the angle her mother had always insisted upon, not tilted up in arrogance, not tilted down in shame, but level, honest, present. There were 3 ranch hands near the fence, and they saw her coming. She heard one of them say something. She didn't catch the words, but she caught the laughter. She always caught the laughter. "Hold there," one of them called out. He was young, maybe 20, with a face still soft enough to be sorry for. "You lost, ma'am." "No," Charlotte said. "I'm here to see Mr. Carter. William Carter. I don't know another Carter on this ranch." The young man's grin flickered. The one beside him, older, thick through the shoulders, leaned on the fence post and looked her over. The way men sometimes did, as though she were livestock, being considered for purchase and found wanting. "You the Whitmore girl," he said. "I am." He scratched the back of his neck. "Your daddy send you all this way by yourself?" "My father sent me, yes." "That right." He said it flat, without a question mark, the way men say things when they've already decided on their answer. "Well, boss don't usually take meetings with—" He paused. He smiled. "With folks who just show up unannounced." "I rode ahead," Charlotte said. 3 weeks ago. Mr. Carter's reply said he would receive me today. That shut him up. Not with shame. Men like that didn't shame easily, but with the particular discomfort of someone whose mockery has been inconveniently interrupted by facts. "I'll take you up," the young one said. He had the grace to sound a little awkward about it. "I can find the door," Charlotte said. "Thank you." She walked past them. She felt their eyes on her back. She had felt eyes on her back her whole life, and she had learned eventually to walk as if she couldn't feel them at all. The front door of Carter Ranch was heavy oak, well kept, with a brass knocker shaped like a horseshoe. Charlotte knocked twice. She waited. She heard boots on floorboards inside, not hurried, not slow, just deliberate the way a man walks in his own house when he has nowhere else to be. The door opened. William Carter was taller than the stories had suggested, and the stories had suggested considerable. He was broad through the shoulders in the way that comes from actual work, not performance. His hair was dark threaded at the temples, with the first gray of a man approaching 40 who has spent those years outdoors. He had a jaw that looked like it had been carved by someone with opinions. His eyes, when they settled on her, were the particular shade of brown that holds no warmth at first glance, but doesn't hold coldness either. They were simply still the way water is still before it moves. He looked at her. He didn't laugh. He didn't look her over the way the men at the gate had done. He just looked at her face the way a person looks at someone they are actually trying to see. "Miss Whitmore," he said. "Mr. Carter." She put her hand forward. He shook it once firmly and let go. "You want to come in?" "I'd rather say what I came to say out here if you don't mind." Something shifted in his expression, but she couldn't name it. He nodded and stepped to the side of the doorframe, leaning against it. Waiting. Charlotte had rehearsed this in the wagon. She had rehearsed it the night before. She had stood in front of the piece of broken mirror in her bedroom in Millhaven, and she had spoken the words aloud until they felt like something she could carry without dropping. "My father owes you $400, she said. "He borrowed it 3 years ago to save the farm after the Eastfield flooded. He has not been able to repay it. He has been unwell." She paused. That was the word they used for what her father was. Unwell. As though the drinking and the gambling and the disappearing for weeks at a time was a sickness that had happened to him rather than a series of choices he had made. "He asked me to come on his behalf, to ask you for more time. 6 months if you can allow it. He intends to sell the eastern 2 acres and settle the debt in full." She stopped talking. She had said what she came to say. William Carter looked at her for a long moment. The wind moved between them. Somewhere behind the house a horse made a sound. "He sent you 40 miles, he said slowly, "to ask for 6 more months." "Yes." "On a debt that's 3 years old." "Yes." "And you came." It wasn't a question. It was something else, something that sounded almost like he was asking her to explain something he genuinely didn't understand. "He's my father," she said. William Carter was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Come inside, Miss Whitmore. I'll have someone bring tea." The kitchen was the warmest room in the house. Charlotte noticed that the way she noticed everything quietly from the outside, storing it for later. There was a wood stove that had been recently blacked, a long table scarred from years of use, a shelf of good china that had not been touched in some time. She could tell by the fine, even layer of dust on the cups, thin as breath. The house was well kept, but not cared for. There was a difference. A woman of about 50 appeared from the back hallway, wiping her hands on an apron. She looked at Charlotte without expression. "Mrs. Pruitt," William said, "could you put on some tea, please?" "Of course." The woman looked at Charlotte once more, then moved to the stove. William sat across the table from Charlotte. He put his hat on the chair beside him. Without it, he looked slightly less like a man from a story and slightly more like an actual person. There was a shallow scar above his left eyebrow that the hat had been hiding. He folded his hands on the table and looked at her with the same stillness she had noticed at the door. "Your father's farm," he said. "How bad is it truly?" Charlotte had not expected this question. She had expected negotiation. She had expected contempt or pity, or the slow, patient cruelty of a man who knows he holds all the advantage and wants you to know it too. "It's bad," she said, because she hadn't rehearsed a lie. Eastfield still flooded. The drainage never came right after the storm. He lost 2 seasons. He working it alone? Since my mother passed, yes. William nodded once. "I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you. When did she pass?" 4 years ago, come October." He nodded again. There was a pause while Mrs. Pruitt set cups on the table, poured the tea, and withdrew without comment. Charlotte wrapped her hands around the cup. The warmth of it was almost shocking. She hadn't realized how cold she was. "You cook?" William asked. Charlotte blinked. "I beg your pardon. I'm not being impertinent. I'm asking a practical question." He looked at the table between them, not at her, and she had the sense he was thinking out loud as much as talking. "I've got a ranch to run, a piece of my sister's child to look after, and a housekeeper who's good with the laundry but can't make a biscuit you'd wish on anyone. I'm asking if you cook." "I cook," Charlotte said carefully. "Why?" He looked up at her then. His eyes were direct in a way that should have been uncomfortable, and somehow wasn't. "Because I have a proposition," he said, "and I want you to hear it before you decide it's something it isn't." Charlotte put her cup down. "Go ahead." "Your father's debt, I'll forgive it. The whole $400 today with a letter you can take home and show him. The farm stays in the family's name. No more interest, no more collection." She stared at him. "In exchange for what?" "3 months," he said. "You stay here at Carter Ranch for 3 months. You help Mrs. Pruitt with the house. You look after my niece Lily. She's 7, been staying with me since my sister got sick, and she needs someone better than me at conversation. And," he paused, "you try the cooking." Charlotte was quiet for a long time. The clock on the wall ticked 7 times. "Mr. Carter," she said at last, "I want to understand you correctly. You are proposing a work arrangement, not anything else." "A work arrangement," he confirmed. "You'll have your own room. Mrs. Pruitt is here every day until supper. My foreman Tom sleeps in the bunkhouse. Nothing improper. Nothing implied. You work 3 months, your father's debt disappears." He paused. "If at the end of 3 months you want to go home, you go home. Simple as that." "Why?" she said. He looked at her. "Why me?" she said. "You could hire any woman in Millhaven." "I could," he agreed. "Then why?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Because you walked 40 miles on your father's behalf, and when you got here, you held your head up. And because the only woman in Millhaven I actually asked, Dora Hensley, in case you're wondering, took one look at the house and said it needed curtains before she'd consider it." Charlotte almost smiled. She stopped herself. "I'm going to be honest with you, Mr. Carter," she said. "People will talk. People always talk. They'll say things about me, about why I'm here, about—" She stopped. She looked at him steadily. "About the way I look." He met her eyes without flinching. "I expect they will. And that doesn't concern you. What other people say about my decisions," William Carter said, "has never concerned me much. Miss Whitmore, I'm asking you to make a practical choice. Your father's debt is real. This offer is real. What you do with it is up to you." Charlotte looked at her teacup. She looked at the dusty good china on the shelf. She thought about the 40 miles she'd come. She thought about the empty expression on her father's face when he'd told her what he needed from her. She thought about the ranch hands at the gate and the way they'd looked at her, and she thought about the way William Carter had looked at her, or rather, looked at her, without the particular kind of subtraction that most men's looks involved when they landed on her body. 3 months, she said. 3 months. "And I want the letter about the debt before I unpack." Something that might have been the beginning of a smile moved across his face. "I'll have it written tonight." "Then I accept," Charlotte said. She picked up her teacup and took a careful sip. Outside, she heard the ranch hands laughing at something. She didn't know if it was about her. She suspected it was. She held the warmth of the cup in her hands and looked at the man across the table and thought, 3 months is a long time. A great many things can change in 3 months, and a great many things can stay exactly the same. She was not sure yet which it would be. By supper time, word had spread to Millhaven. She found this out later from Pete Hadley, who had made 2 postal runs that day and had a talent for carrying news that rivaled his talent for carrying mail. By the time Charlotte had been shown to a clean room at the back of the house and had hung her one extra dress on the hook behind the door, the story moving through town had already been inflated to something magnificent and terrible. "The Whitmore girl is living out at Carter Ranch. William Carter took her in as payment for the debt. She went there to trap him. You know how those desperate women are. Poor man. What choice did he have? Charlotte did not hear these things that first day. She heard them later in the way you hear things that have been said about you secondhand in fragments with the particular quality of cruelty that is designed to survive the telling. What she knew that first evening was simpler. She knew the kitchen which she had already walked 3 times to understand. She knew the stove which ran hot on the left and needed watching. She knew that Lily, who appeared at the kitchen doorway at 5:30 with a smear of dirt on her chin and a suspicious expression, was 7 years old and had her uncle's eyes and her mother's stubbornness. "You're the lady who's staying here now," Lily announced from the doorway. "I am," Charlotte said. She was rolling out dough on the kitchen table because the bread situation in the house was a genuine emergency, and she had decided to address it immediately. "What are you making?" "Bread. And if there's honey anywhere in this house, biscuits tomorrow morning." Lily came 2 steps into the kitchen. "There's honey. Mrs. Pruitt hides it because last time I found it, I ate all of it." "That does sound like a you problem." Lily blinked. Then, to Charlotte's great private relief, she laughed. It was a sudden, unguarded laugh, the kind that children produce when an adult says something unexpected. "You're funny," Lily said, as though this surprised her. "Occasionally," Charlotte allowed. Lily came the rest of the way into the kitchen and climbed up onto the bench beside the table. She watched Charlotte work in silence for a moment. Then, "My mama's sick." "I know," Charlotte said. "I'm sorry. Uncle William says she's going to get better." Charlotte rolled the dough, folded it, turned it. "I hope she does." "Do you think she will?" Charlotte looked at the child. Lily looked back at her with the particular directness of a 7-year-old who has been talked to carefully by adults for too long and has learned to hear everything that wasn't being said. "I think your Uncle William loves your mama very much," Charlotte said honestly. "And I think the people who love each other that hard find ways to hold on." Lily was quiet. Then she said, "Can I help with the bread?" "You can press the edges down," Charlotte said. "Like this." She showed her. Lily did it with enormous concentration, her small hands precise and serious. William Carter ate supper at the far end of the table, with a space between himself and the rest of the world that Charlotte recognized as habitual. He ate Mrs. Pruitt's leftover stew without apparent feeling about it either way. He read something. He answered Lily's questions about horses in short, accurate sentences that suggested he had been asked these questions before and had decided they deserved real answers. When Charlotte set the bread on the table, he looked up. "Where'd that come from?" "The kitchen," she said, "where bread generally comes from." He looked at the bread. He looked at her. He broke off a piece and ate it. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "That's very good bread, Miss Whitmore." "Thank you, Mr. Carter." "I don't know where the honey got to," Lily announced with perfect innocence. William looked at his niece. He looked at Charlotte. Charlotte looked at the ceiling. "Lily," he said. "Yes, Uncle William. Where is the honey?" "I'm not sure where it could be." "Lily." "It might be in my room." "Go get it." Lily got it with the particular expression of a child who has calculated that this outcome was inevitable and is performing resignation for the audience. She set it on the table. William spread honey on his bread without further comment. He passed the jar to Charlotte. "Thank you," Charlotte said. He said, and returned to his reading. It was, Charlotte thought, the most normal supper she had eaten in years. Not because anything about it was extraordinary, but because no one had looked at her plate. No one had commented on what she took. No one had shifted in their chair or made a small face that said, "Does she really need that?" She ate her bread. She poured her own honey. She was simply a person at a table. She had almost forgotten what that felt like. 3 days passed. Then 5. Then a week. Millhaven did not forget about her. She discovered this on her first trip to town, which William had sent her on for supplies with a list and a wagon, and Tom the foreman, who was a quiet red-haired man from Kentucky, who seemed to operate on a policy of minimal conversation and maximum efficiency. The general store was run by a man named Dade, who had a wife named Marvel, who was always present and never appeared to be doing anything other than listening. Charlotte gave Dade the list. He started pulling items. She waited at the counter and was aware the way she was always aware of being watched. "You're the Whitmore girl," Marvel Dade said. "I am." "Staying out at Carter Ranch?" "I am." Marvel looked her over. The look was practiced and thorough and meant to be felt. "Isn't that thing?" she said. Charlotte looked at a jar of peppercorns on the shelf and waited for whatever came next. "I always did think." Marvel continued adjusting a bolt of fabric on the counter that didn't need adjusting, that William Carter had particular tastes, particular criteria, you might say, for female company. Charlotte looked at her. "I'm sure he does," she said pleasantly. "Most people do." Marvel Dade blinked. That wasn't the response she'd been expecting. "Of course," Charlotte added. "I wouldn't know his criteria personally. I'm his housekeeper, which is what I'm doing, keeping house. Was there something you needed from the counter, ma'am? Or were you just stretching?" There was a moment of absolute silence in the general store. Tom behind her made a sound that was definitely not a laugh. Marvel Dade's mouth thinned. "I'm sure I don't know what you mean." "I'm sure you don't," Charlotte agreed and turned back to Dade. "Do you have nutmeg? I couldn't find it on the list, but I'll need it for the pies." She heard as she left the store the murmur of voices starting up behind her. She didn't turn around. She helped Tom load the wagon, and she sat up on the seat, and she watched the Montana sky spread itself out ahead of them, all the way back to Carter Ranch, wide and blue and indifferent like it always was. Like she had decided a long time ago to be. What she had not decided was this: the sound of William Carter's boots on the porch at night. She hadn't expected to notice it. She hadn't expected to notice him at all, beyond the practical necessities of working in the same house. But the evenings had a way of opening up space in that house that was harder to fill than daytime. He came out to the porch most nights after supper. Sometimes he had a book. Sometimes he had nothing at all. He just sat in the chair at the far end with his forearms on his knees and his eyes on the distance, and seemed to be engaged in a conversation with something that wasn't there. Charlotte told herself she was not paying attention to this. She was on the other end of the porch with Lily, who had decided that evenings were for questions. Why is the sky different colors at sunset? Because the light travels through more air at that angle, and the colors separate. Which color travels the farthest? Red. That's why the horizon goes red first. Is red the strongest color? In light, yes. Is red the strongest color in everything? No. In everything else, it's just a color. That doesn't seem fair. A lot of things aren't fair, Lily. William, from the far end of the porch, said, without looking up from whatever he wasn't looking at. "She's right, you know, about the light." Charlotte looked at him. "I read it once," he said. "Scattering. That's what it's called. When the light scatters." He paused. "I didn't know why it was red until I read that." "Neither did I," Charlotte said. "Until my mother explained it." He glanced at her. She was a teacher. No, she was just curious. She read everything she could get her hands on, and then she told it to whoever would listen. Charlotte paused. "Mostly to me." William was quiet for a moment. "That's a good way to raise a child," he said. "Filling them up with things worth knowing." Charlotte looked at Lily, who had leaned her head against Charlotte's arm and was watching the last of the red sky with a 7-year-old's total absorption. "Yes," Charlotte said. "It is." The silence that settled after that was not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that happens between people who have found, without entirely meaning to, that they fit into the same quiet. Charlotte did not examine this. She looked at the sky. She felt Lily's small warm weight against her arm. And she thought very carefully, and with great self-discipline, about nothing at all. On the 12th day, the trouble started. She had been expecting it, more or less. Trouble, in her experience, was patient. It waited until you had started to breathe normally, and then it came. It came in the form of a man named Holt Grayson, who rode into Carter Ranch on a Tuesday morning on a horse that cost more than most families saw in a year, and who stood in the yard with the particular posture of a man who is accustomed to other men moving out of his way. I was perhaps 50, with a face built for authority and eyes built for calculation. Charlotte knew the type. Her father had owed money to men who looked exactly like this, and she had learned to read the particular quality of greed that made them walk the way they walked, as if the ground itself was already theirs. She was bringing water out to the garden when he arrived. She stopped. He looked at her. "You the new hired girl?" he said. "No, ma'am. No preamble. I work for Mr. Carter," Charlotte said. "Can I help you?" "Get Carter for me." Charlotte set the water bucket down. "Mr. Carter is in the north field. Tom can ride out if you—" "I'll wait." He walked past her to the porch, sat down in the chair at the far end. William's chair, and crossed his legs as if he owned the property and was merely allowing them all to remain. Charlotte went inside and found Mrs. Pruitt. "Who is Holt Grayson?" she said. Mrs. Pruitt's expression confirmed everything Charlotte had already suspected. "Land buyer," the older woman said. "He's been after Carter Ranch for 3 years, wants to consolidate the whole valley. He already bought out the Hendersons and the Marsh family." "What does he want with this ranch?" "Same thing men like that always want. More." Mrs. Pruitt wiped down the counter. "Mr. Carter's turned him down twice, but Grayson, he's patient. He waits for people to get weak and then he comes in." Charlotte looked toward the window. "He doesn't look patient to me." "He's not. He's pretending." She went back outside with a glass of water. Not for Grayson, but to set it on the railing because she had established this as part of her morning routine, and she was not going to alter her routine for a man who hadn't said ma'am. He watched her move around the yard. She could feel it. She carried on. When William came back from the north field, he saw Grayson on the porch, and the stillness in his face shifted into something careful and controlled. "Grayson," he said. Not a greeting, an acknowledgement. "Carter." Grayson stood. He looked at William, and then past him at Charlotte. He smiled in a way that had no warmth in it. "I see you've made some domestic improvements." "What do you want?" William said. "Same thing I always want, a conversation." "I've given you 2. Humor me a 3rd time. A man's circumstances change. I like to keep up." William looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, "Come inside." He did not look at Charlotte, but as he passed her he said very quietly, "You don't have to go anywhere." She hadn't moved. She wasn't going to move. She picked up the water bucket. She went back to the garden. From the kitchen window, 20 minutes later, she heard voices. William's steady low, Grayson's measured and persuasive. She couldn't make out the words. She didn't need to. She had heard that particular conversation before. She had grown up in a house full of that conversation. Men like Grayson never said what they meant in the first sentence. They built toward it. They laid the groundwork the way a man lays a trap, with patience, with bait, with a smile you weren't supposed to recognize as teeth. She rolled out the pie crust. She listened to the voices rise and fall. She waited. Grayson came out of the house 25 minutes later with the controlled face of a man who has not gotten what he wanted, but is not yet ready to stop trying. He crossed the yard toward his horse. He paused beside Charlotte, who was hanging the washing on the line. "You know," he said conversationally, "a man like William Carter is going to want a certain kind of woman to run this ranch." Charlotte kept her hands on the sheets. "Is that so? A certain stature, a certain presentation." He let the pause do what he wanted the words to do without having to say them. "I'm only saying it as a friend." "You're not my friend," Charlotte said. "And you're not his." Grayson looked at her with a new expression. Not quite surprise, something colder. "You've got a mouth on you," he said. "I've got a lot of things on me," Charlotte said pleasantly. "Have a safe ride, Mr. Grayson." He got on his horse. He rode out. Charlotte hung the last sheet and stood there in the sharp Montana morning, with the wind moving through the clean linen, and thought that man is going to be a problem. She was right. But that was a problem for later. Right now there were pies that needed finishing, and a little girl who had asked 3 times about biscuits, and a man sitting at the far end of a porch who had told her quietly, "You don't have to go anywhere." She had not forgotten that. She was turning it over in her mind, the way you turn over something you found on the road, carefully at different angles, trying to understand what it is before you decide what to do with it. She went back inside. She made the pies. Outside, the Montana sky was doing what it always did, stretching itself over everything without apology. Red bleeding slowly into the gold of afternoon, indifferent and enormous, and somehow in spite of all of it still beautiful. The pies came out perfect. Charlotte knew they would. She had made that particular recipe, brown sugar dried apple, a pinch of cinnamon she'd found hiding behind the nutmeg since she was 11 years old, standing on a stool beside her mother in a kitchen smaller than this one. Her hands knew what to do without her having to think about it, and that was the kind of knowledge she had always been grateful for, the kind nobody could take. She set them on the windowsill to cool and went to find Lily. The little girl was in the barn, which was where she went when she was thinking hard about something. Charlotte had figured this out on day 4. Lily didn't pace. She didn't cry. She went to the barn and talked to the horses who were, in her opinion, the only members of the household who listened without offering advice. "You're going to get your dress dirty," Charlotte said from the doorway. "It's already dirty," Lily said without turning around. She had her arms around the neck of a gray mare that was tolerating this with the weary patience of an animal that has been loved on by small children before. Charlotte. "Is Mr. Grayson going to take the ranch?" Charlotte came inside. She leaned against the stall door. "No," she said. "How do you know?" "Because your Uncle William said no." "He said no before and Grayson came back." "That's true. So how do you know this time is different?" Charlotte thought about the way William had come out of the house after Grayson left. He hadn't said anything about the meeting. He'd gone back to the fence line, picked up the post hole digger, and worked for 2 hours without stopping. She had watched him from the kitchen window. Not because she was watching him, she told herself this very firmly, but because the window faced that direction and she was at the sink. "Because this time," Charlotte said carefully, "your uncle has more to protect." Lily considered this, her cheek pressed against the mare's neck. "Because of you." Charlotte didn't answer that. She pushed off from the stall door and said, "Come eat, the pies are cooling." "Can I have the first piece?" "You can have the first piece." Lily came away from the horse without further argument. That was the thing about Lily. She had a grief in her that went very deeper than 7-year-olds should have to carry, but she also had a practicality that Charlotte recognized from her own childhood. When the people around you are fragile, you learn to be practical. You learn to find the solid things and hold on to them. Right now for Lily, the solid things were the horses and the pie and Charlotte's presence in the kitchen at the end of the day. Charlotte was not going to examine how that made her feel. Not yet. She went back to the kitchen and cut the pie. She heard William come in a few minutes later, the sound of water at the pump outside, the particular way he cleared his throat before walking into a room where other people were. He had a lot of small habits like that, she had noticed. He always knocked on door frames before entering even rooms he owned. He always set his hat brim down on the table, never crown down. He always poured his coffee with his right hand and held the cup with his left. She noticed these things the way she noticed everything. She just stored them away. She was not sure yet why she was storing them. "Smells like pie," he said, coming into the kitchen. "It is pie," Lily said with great authority. William sat at the table. Charlotte put a slice in front of him without asking. He looked at it. He looked at her. He picked up his fork. The first bite produced a silence that was different from his usual silence. This one was considered. "Where'd you learn to make this?" he said. "My mother." "What else did she teach you?" "Most of what I know," Charlotte said. She sat down across from him with her own slice and her own fork, and she ate her pie, and she did not look at him, and she realized, completely comfortable. Not performing comfort. Not constructing it. Just comfortable in the way you are comfortable in places where no one is waiting for you to be something different. It was such an unfamiliar feeling that she almost didn't recognize it. William ate the rest of his slice in silence. Then he said, "Grayson's going to come back." "I know. He always does. Man's like weather. You can't stop it, you just decide whether you're going to be inside or out when it hits." "What did he offer this time?" He looked at her. There was a flicker of something surprised maybe that she'd asked directly. Then it settled back into that stillness. More than last time, he said. Enough that a man who was tired would take it. Are you tired? Everybody's tired, William said. That's not the same as giving up. Charlotte thought about her father. She thought about the particular kind of tired that looked like giving up because it had been tired for so long it couldn't remember what the other thing felt like. She thought about the choice she had made 40 miles ago to walk into a stranger's yard with her head up. No, she said. It's not. Lily, who had been watching this exchange with the focused attention of a child tracking something important, said, Are we going to be okay, Uncle William? William looked at his niece. Something crossed his face that was too complicated to name: love and worry, and the particular weight of a man who has promised things he isn't sure he can keep. Yeah, he said. We're going to be okay. He said it like he meant it. That was what Charlotte noticed. Not the words. The way he said them without hesitation, without qualification, as if he had decided that this was true and intended to make it so through sheer force of will. She believed him. She wasn't sure she should, but she did. The evening settled in around the three of them. Charlotte washed the dishes. Lily dried or attempted to achieving mixed results. William sat at the table with his account ledgers working through numbers with the focused quiet of a man trying to solve a problem that arithmetic cannot entirely reach. At some point, Charlotte looked up and realized the kitchen had gotten dark, and she had been so comfortable that she hadn't noticed the hours passing. That hadn't happened to her since her mother was alive. She said goodnight. She went to her room. She lay in the narrow bed and listened to the sound of the ranch settling into darkness. The horses shifting the wood of the house, contracting in the cool, the distant call of something wild, far out in the valley, and she thought 3 months. You are here for 3 months. This is work. This is a debt being settled. This is not yours. She told herself this until the sound of the ranch at night was too steady and too warm to argue with, and she slept. The next morning she woke up before dawn, which she always did, and went to the kitchen, which was cold, and lit the stove, which took 3 tries, and had the coffee going before Mrs. Pruitt arrived. Mrs. Pruitt came in, took one look at the kitchen, and said nothing. This was Charlotte had learned the closest the woman came to approval. I'll need more flour if I'm going to keep up with the bread, Charlotte said. I'll add it to the order. And the brown sugar's running low. Also noted. Charlotte poured Mrs. Pruitt a cup of coffee and set it on the counter beside her without comment. The older woman looked at it. She picked it up. She drank. There was a pause. You're up early, Mrs. Pruitt said. I'm always up early. Carter's the same way, up before the sun. I've worked here 6 years, and I've never beaten him to the kitchen. Has he always been alone? Charlotte asked before she could stop herself. Mrs. Pruitt looked at her over the rim of the cup. Her expression was careful in the way that long-time employees' expressions are careful, measuring how much is being asked versus how much should be answered. He had a woman once, she said finally. Before I came on. Her name was Frances. She was lovely. Everyone said so. A pause. She chose someone else. A man with a bigger name and a house in the city. Carter never spoke of it afterward. Not once. Charlotte looked at the stove. He's not cold, Mrs. Pruitt said, and her voice had something in it now, something that was almost a warning, but directed Charlotte realized at neither of them in particular. He's careful. There's a difference. I know the difference, Charlotte said. Mrs. Pruitt nodded once as if this answer was acceptable. She drank her coffee. The kitchen filled slowly with the smell of biscuits and morning. The day arrived like days always did, with more in it than you had planned for. The first thing that happened was Tom riding in hard from the east pasture with news that 3 fence sections were down and cattle were loose. William was out the door before Tom finished the sentence, calling for 2 more hands moving fast, completely focused. Charlotte stood on the porch and watched him go, and then went inside and made a large midday meal for whenever they came back, because that was the kind of thing she could do. The second thing that happened was a wagon pulling up to the gate just before noon. Charlotte heard it from the kitchen. She dried her hands and went to the door. There were 2 women in the wagon, one of about 30, with a sharp face and ribbons on her hat, that cost more than Charlotte's whole traveling bag, and one older, perhaps 60, who had the well-maintained look of a woman who has always had servants and has never had to wonder about it. Charlotte had never seen either of them before in her life. "Can I help you?" she said from the porch. The younger one smiled. It was the kind of smile that cost nothing to produce. "We're looking for William Carter. I'm Adelaide Marsh. This is my mother, Eleanor." "He's out on the property. Is there something I can help you with?" Adelaide Marsh looked at Charlotte, the way Marvel Dade had looked at her in the general store, the complete assessing look, but where Marvel Dade's look had been a weapon. Adelaide's was something more complex. It was the look of a woman calculating a threat. "You must be the Whitmore girl," Adelaide said. "I must be. I'd heard William had taken on a housekeeper." The pause before the word was elegant and cruel. "We just thought we'd call. We're neighbors, actually. The Marsh property is just 3 miles east. Was 3 miles east." She kept smiling. "Mr. Grayson purchased it last year. Mama and I are staying with the Henrys in town now." Charlotte looked at her. "I'm sorry to hear that." "Are you?" The smile didn't waver. "You don't know us." "I know what it is to lose a home," Charlotte said. "You don't need to know someone to be sorry for it." Adelaide Marsh blinked. That had not been what she expected. Charlotte came down the porch steps. "Come inside. I'll put on tea while you wait for Mr. Carter." The older woman, Eleanor, who had said nothing up to this point, made a small sound. Charlotte looked at her. "You're very gracious," Eleanor Marsh said quietly. She was looking at Charlotte with an expression that was different from her daughter's, entirely thoughtful, and something like sad. "For a housekeeper." "I'm gracious for a person," Charlotte said. "The rest is just a job." She led them inside. William came back at 1:30 with mud on his boots and the efficient, contained energy of a man who has solved a physical problem and is already thinking about the next one. He stopped short when he saw the Marsh women sitting at the kitchen table. "Adelaide," he said. "William." She had arranged herself at the table with the particular precision of a woman who knows exactly how she looks in every possible light. "I hope you don't mind. Your housekeeper was very welcoming." William looked at Charlotte. Charlotte handed him a cup of coffee and said nothing. "How's your mother?" he said to Adelaide, pulling out a chair. "Managing, as women do." Adelaide's eyes moved to Charlotte, who was at the counter slicing bread. "You've made quite a few changes out here. It's almost homey. You've never had that before." "I didn't have the right help before," William said. Charlotte kept slicing. "Grayson came to see you," Adelaide said. Her voice shifted lower, more direct. The performance of friendliness dropped a register. "I know because he told us. He tells everyone his business as a way of making them feel included right up until he takes what he wants." William looked at her steadily. "He did. And nothing's changed." Adelaide leaned forward. "William, he's buying the whole valley, one ranch at a time. He'll come back. He always comes back, and every time he does the offer is different, not better different. He finds the pressure point. He found ours." A pause. "He'll find yours." The kitchen was very quiet. Charlotte set the bread on the table and filled Adelaide's cup without being asked. Adelaide looked at her. For the first time, the assessment in that look had changed. It was not entirely friendly. Old calculations don't vanish that quickly, but it was no longer the same thing it had been at the gate. "What's the pressure point he's looking for here?" Charlotte asked, because nobody else was going to ask it. Adelaide looked at William. William looked at the table. "He wants the water rights," he said. "The creek that runs through the north edge of my property, it feeds half the valley. If he owns Carter Ranch, he controls the water. Then it doesn't matter who else holds out. He'll have everything that matters." "And he knows you know that," Charlotte said. "Yes." "So why keep offering if he can't get you through price? What's the other pressure?" Adelaide's eyes moved to Charlotte with something new in them. "She's sharp," she said to William. "Yes," William said, simply, without adding anything. Charlotte looked at him. He looked back at her. And in the space of that look, Charlotte understood that she had just been not defended exactly, but named, accurately, by a man who chose his words the way he chose everything deliberately without waste and meaning exactly what he said. She looked at her cup. The other pressure, Adelaide said, her voice dropping further, is that Grayson found out about the Eastern property claim. The one your grandfather filed that was never fully registered. He's got a lawyer in Helena who says there's a challenge to be made. If he can get that into a territorial court, it could freeze your operations for 2 years minimum. William's jaw tightened. Just slightly. Just enough. That's why he's coming to you now, Charlotte said slowly. Before you know about the challenge, he wants you to sell before you can fight. The silence stretched out. Eleanor Marsh, who had said almost nothing throughout all of it, set down her teacup and looked at William with the calm of a woman who has watched men make decisions for 60 years and knows the exact shape of the ones they regret. My husband didn't believe Grayson would follow through either, she said, right up until the papers came. William stood up. He walked to the window. He stood there with his back to the room and his hands in his pockets, and Charlotte watched the line of his shoulders and thought he already knew about the land claim. He's known for a while. He just didn't want to say it out loud, because saying it out loud makes it real. How long do I have? He said. Grayson files in Helena at the end of the month, Adelaide said. That's 3 weeks. William turned around. His face was controlled, but his eyes had the particular quality of a man running through options in real time, calculating, sorting, discarding. Thank you, he said, for telling me. Adelaide rose. Her mother followed. At the door, Adelaide paused and looked back at Charlotte with an expression that had finally settled into something approaching honest. You're good at this, she said. Meaning the house, the tea, the conversation. Meaning Charlotte understood something larger than any of those things. At what? Charlotte said. Keeping things steady when everything's moving. Adelaide glanced at William. He could use that, whatever arrangement this is. She left before Charlotte could answer. The kitchen was very quiet again. William sat back down. He put his hands flat on the table and looked at them for a long moment. You knew about the land claim, Charlotte said. It was not a question. Found out 2 weeks ago. Before I came. Before you came. Charlotte sat down across from him. Is it a real challenge? My grandfather registered in '62. The filing was partial because the territorial office flooded and half the records were lost. There's an argument to be made. He exhaled. It's not a good argument. But a lawyer in Helena can make a bad argument last 2 years. Can you find a lawyer of your own? The only one in Millhaven does property work for the general store and the occasional dispute about chickens. Helena's 2 days' ride. Then you need to go to Helena. He looked at her. 2 days there, 2 days back. Take the documentation you have. Find someone who handles territorial claims. She was thinking out loud, she knew, in the way that was sometimes impolite, but the problem was sitting right there, and her mind had already gotten hold of it. In the meantime, is there anyone in the valley who would sign a statement about the water rights, their own dependency on that creek? It won't stop the legal challenge, but it complicates Grayson's position if it goes to court. William was staring at her. What? She said. You do this often, he said. Solve other people's problems. I grew up in a house with a lot of problems, she said. You learn to think that way. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I'd have to be gone 4 days minimum. Lily's here. The ranch doesn't stop for legal trouble. I'll manage, Charlotte said. That's not... He stopped. He looked at her. That's a significant thing to take on. I'm aware of what it is. I haven't asked you to do that. You didn't have to, Charlotte said. I'm telling you I can. Something moved through his face, complicated, layered more than the moment seemed to call for. He looked at her the way he had looked at her that very first day on the porch, directly, with the kind of attention that didn't subtract anything. All right, he said. All right, she agreed. He got up, and his hand, just briefly, just for a second, passing close enough to the edge of the table where her hand rested, almost touched it. Not quite. He went out to find Tom. Charlotte sat at the table alone. She pressed her hand flat against the wood where his had almost been, and she thought, this is work. This is a debt. 3 months. She thought it very carefully and very clearly. It helped less than it should have. The day that William left for Helena was overcast and cold for the season. Charlotte stood in the yard and watched him ride out at first light with Tom beside him, and a saddlebag full of documents, and a face that said he had already made peace with the discomfort of it. He paused at the gate. He looked back at her. "Don't let Lily near the honey again," he said. "I'll do my best," Charlotte said. He almost smiled. He rode out. Lily appeared at Charlotte's elbow. "He always looks like that when he leaves," she said. "Like what?" "Like he's not sure the place will still be here when he comes back." Charlotte looked at the empty gate. "It'll be here," she said. "Because of you," Lily said. Charlotte put her hand on the girl's shoulder. "Because we're here," she said. "Come on, help me start the bread." And then the first knock came at the gate before breakfast was even finished. It was Mrs. Calder from the neighboring farm, a small, wind-worn woman with a baby on her hip and 2 children trailing behind her. Her husband, she said, had broken his leg 2 days ago. She'd come to ask if she could borrow their draft horse to finish the harvest before the weather turned. Charlotte said yes, of course, take the horse. She packed the family bread and the last of the dried beef and sent one of the ranch hands with them to help with the work. The ranch hand, a boy named Jesse, 19 years old and generally uncomfortable around anyone in authority, looked at Charlotte when she gave him the instruction. "Mr. Carter didn't authorize," he started. "Mr. Carter," Charlotte said, "would have done the same. You know that and I know that. Go help the Calders." Jesse went. By noon word had moved through the valley. The way word always moved along fence lines and supply runs, and women visiting neighbors with excuses, and 2 more families stopped by the ranch. One needed medical supplies for a child with fever. One had a question about the creek drainage that was flooding the lower field. Charlotte dealt with both. She dipped into the household emergency supplies for the medicine she would account for it when William returned. She drew a rough map for the other family, showing where Tom had told her the drainage issue usually originated and what temporary measures could be taken. Mrs. Pruitt, watching this from the kitchen doorway, said, "You know you're running this ranch." "I'm managing," Charlotte said. "It's different." "Is it?" Charlotte looked at her. A woman managing a ranch. Mrs. Pruitt said, not with judgment, but with something that sounded almost like wonder, "In this valley in this year, looking the way you do." She stopped. She set her hands on the counter. "People are going to talk. They already talk. This is different talking. This is they'll say you overstepped. They'll say you maneuvered. They'll say you planned all of this." "Let them say it," Charlotte said. "That's easy to say." "No," Charlotte said. "It isn't, but it's true regardless." She went back to the bread. "I'm not here to manage what people say about me. I'm here to keep this ranch running while Mr. Carter is away on ranch business. That's what I'm doing." Mrs. Pruitt was quiet. Then she said in a different voice, "The Murdoch family up on the North Ridge. Their well's been failing for a month. They've been hauling water from the creek. 3 kids under 10. Charlotte looked at her. "I mention it," Mrs. Pruitt said, "because someone with access to a ranch with 4 working hands and a water source might be able to help." Charlotte was already untying her apron. "Jesse," she called. It was that kind of day. And then it was that kind of 2 days after. By the time William rode back into the yard on the evening of the 4th day, tired, dusted, with Tom behind him and the expression of a man who has fought a bureaucratic battle in a city and is glad to be back in a place where problems have physical solutions. Charlotte was at the fence talking to a Crow woman named Delia, who lived near the North Ridge and who had been trading dried herbs for flour for 3 years with Mrs. Pruitt, and had information about a secondary water route that might matter if Grayson's land claim ever actually complicated access to the main creek. William stopped his horse. He looked at Charlotte talking to Delia at the fence with the comfortable ease of 2 women who have established a working relationship. He looked at the yard, which was busy in the particular way of a place that is being used well. A family loading supplies, one of the hands fixing a wheel on a borrowed wagon, Mrs. Pruitt carrying something to a wagon at the gate. He looked at all of it. Then he looked at Charlotte. She had noticed him arrive. She held up a finger one moment and finished what she was saying to Delia, shook her hand, and walked across the yard toward him. "How is Helena?" she said. "Expensive," he said. "And we have a lawyer." "How was Guy? Productive," she said. He got off his horse. He stood beside her in the yard and looked at it again, the movement of people and purpose, the particular aliveness of a place being taken care of, and something crossed his face that she hadn't seen before. Something without a name she could find quickly. "The Calder's harvest," he said. "Done." "The Murdoch water situation." She blinked. "You knew about that." "I know about most things on this valley. I just don't always—" He stopped. "You handled it. I sent Jesse and 2 hands with pipe sections from the back storage. Temporary fix. You'll want to look at it properly when you have time." "The Arroyo family's medicine." Charlotte looked at him. "Tom told me," he said. "Word moves fast." "I'll account for everything I used from supplies," she said. "Every item. I know you will." He said it simply, without question, without the particular quality that people usually had in their voice when they said things like that. The undertone of "you'd better" or "I'm watching." He said it the way you acknowledge a fact about a person's character because you have seen it demonstrated and you consider it settled. Charlotte looked at the yard. "People are talking," she said, "about what I did while you were gone." "What kind of talking?" "The kind that says I overstepped, that I had motives, that a woman who looks like me taking on authority in this kind of situation." She stopped. William turned to face her fully. He had a way of doing that, of giving his whole attention to a thing that was not dramatic, just complete. "What do you think?" he said. "I think I did what needed doing." "So do I." "It doesn't bother you," she said. "What they're saying." Howe was quiet for a moment. Not the silence of someone thinking up an answer. The silence of someone choosing which true thing to say. "Miss Whitmore," he said, "I came back to a ranch that's running better than when I left it. I came back to a valley full of people who got help they needed. I came back to my niece in one piece and probably eating better than she has in a year." He paused. "What people are saying about that has nothing to do with what it is." Charlotte looked at him. Her throat did something complicated that she declined to examine. "Supper's at 7, she said. "I'll be cleaned up by then," he said. He took his horse toward the barn. He stopped halfway there and turned back. "Charlotte," he said. She turned. It was the first time he had used her first name. She was not sure he knew he had done it. "Thank you," he said. Just that. The 2 words direct and plain and without performance. She nodded. She went inside. In the kitchen, she put her hands on the counter and stood very still for a moment, looking at the wall. 3 months, she told herself. 3 months. The problem was that she had been here 3 weeks, and somehow, without her permission, this kitchen had started feeling like hers. She wasn't sure yet what to do with that. What she did not know, could not have known, standing there in the kitchen, with the evening settling in around her, was that Holt Grayson had ridden back into Millhaven that same afternoon. He had brought with him a lawyer from Helena, and a document that he was very carefully keeping private, and he had gone to the saloon and over drinks. He had done what men like him always do when direct approaches fail. He had started working on something softer. Something that didn't look like an attack until it was already through the door. He had started asking questions about Charlotte Whitmore. Not questions about the ranch. Not questions about the debt. Personal questions. The kind that small towns answer freely because they've been waiting to say the words out loud, and someone finally gave them permission. The bartender told him about the family reputation. Marvel Dade told him about Charlotte's mother who had died, and her father who had fallen apart after. A woman who had grown up next door to the Whitmores told him about Charlotte's childhood, about the children who had been unkind. The church women who had whispered, the boys who had laughed. Grayson listened to all of it with the patient attention of a man building something out of whatever material is available. When he left the saloon that night, he had the outline of something. Not a legal argument. Something more dangerous. The kind of weapon that doesn't leave marks. The kind that works by making people feel the way they already privately felt, and just giving that feeling a name and a direction. He was going to make William Carter doubt her. Not with facts. With something worse than facts. With the slow accumulated weight of what everyone in this valley had always thought about Charlotte Whitmore. He was going to plant a question. And in Charlotte's experience, Questions once planted grew in the dark. She stood in the kitchen and heard the sound of William washing up at the pump outside. She heard Lily calling from her room about something, probably the honey again. She heard the horses and the evening and the particular alive quiet of a place that is cared for. She did not know what was coming. She just stood there in the warmth she had built in the kitchen that had started to feel like hers, and she let herself just for a moment before she remembered all the reasons not to let herself be glad she was here. Outside, the first star appeared above the Montana Ridge. Then the second. Then, Grayson's lamp moved along the Millhaven Road, and the dark came down around everything, and 3 weeks began to matter, the way only certain kinds of weeks do not, because of what happened in them, but because of who you became while they were passing. Grayson moved quietly, which was what made him dangerous. I didn't come to the ranch again right away. He didn't send a lawyer or a letter. He did something smaller and more effective. He went to church on Sunday morning and sat in the third pew and shook hands with people and smiled. And when Charlotte's name came up, and he made sure it came up, he said nothing directly against her. He simply tilted his head and let a small, thoughtful silence do the work that words would have done too clumsily. He said things like, "I'm sure she means well," and "It's generous of William to be so trusting," and, "Of course a woman in her situation would do what she could to make herself useful." He said these things to the right people. To Marvel Dade, who repeated everything. To Pastor Holloway, who had opinions about propriety. To the 3 or 4 women in Millhaven, who had been quietly deciding for weeks what kind of woman Charlotte Whitmore was, and needed only the smallest push to say it out loud. Charlotte didn't hear any of this directly. She heard it the way she always heard things secondhand at odd angles through gaps in conversations that weren't quite shut before she arrived. She heard it first from Jesse of all people, who was mucking out the barn when she came in one morning, and who had the grace to look ashamed before she had even said a word. What she said, because his face was telling her something whether he wanted it to or not. "Nothing, ma'am." Jesse. He stabbed the pitchfork into the straw and looked at the wall. "People in town are saying things." "I know people in town say things. These are different things." He stopped. He started again. "They're saying you came here to trap Mr. Carter. That the debt was a setup. That your daddy planned it and you're carrying it out." He said the last part quickly, like something he needed to get out of his mouth. Charlotte was quiet for a moment. The barn was warm around them and smelled of hay and horse and winter coming. "And what do you think?" she said. Jesse finally looked at her. He was 19 years old and had the decency to look like this conversation was costing him something. "I think," he said slowly, "that you sent me to help the Calders when you didn't have to, and that you stayed up 2 nights when Mrs. Murdoch's little boy had the fever, and that you make bread every morning even though nobody asked you to." He paused. "I don't think that's trapping anybody." Charlotte picked up a brush from the hook and went to the nearest horse. She ran it along the animal's flank in long, even strokes. Her hands were steady. She was very deliberately making them steady. "Thank you, Jesse," she said. "Yes, ma'am." She heard him go back to work behind her, and she stood there with the brush and the horse and the quiet of the barn, and she thought it started. Right on schedule. Exactly as she had known it would. The question now was what Grayson intended to do with it. She found out 2 days later. She was in the kitchen when William came in from town with a look on his face she hadn't seen before, not angry, not cold, but tight in the way that a man's face gets when he is holding something in that wants very badly to come out. He set his hat on the table. He sat down. He looked at his hands. "Something happened in town," Charlotte said, not a question. "Ran into Grayson outside the land office." She waited. "How was polite," William said, and said the word like it tasted wrong. "Asked after the ranch, asked after Lily, asked—" He stopped. He pressed his palms flat on the table. "He asked if I knew about your father's history, beyond the debt." Charlotte's stomach went very still. "What history?" William looked up at her. "He said your father lost a previous property in Kansas, 12 years ago. Borrowed against it from a man named Tallow. Couldn't pay. Lost the property and the man's money." A pause. "He said it wasn't the first time your family had done this, that it was a pattern." The kitchen was quiet. Charlotte could hear the clock. "Is that true?" William said. She met his eyes. "Yes." Something moved across his face. "My father lost the Kansas property when I was 13, she said. "We moved to Millhaven after. He promised my mother it wouldn't happen again." She paused. "It happened again, just more slowly." She kept her voice even. "I'm not going to lie to you about my family, Mr. Carter. My father is a man who makes promises he can't keep and borrows money he can't repay and loses things that other people love. That is who he is. I have known it for a long time." She looked at him steadily. "That is not who I am." The silence stretched between them. "I know that," William said. 3 words. No hesitation. Charlotte blinked. "I know that," he said again more quietly. I wasn't asking because I doubted you. I was asking because Grayson told me in front of 3 other men, and I want to know what I'm dealing with." He exhaled. "He's building something. This is the foundation." Charlotte sat down across from him. "He's trying to make you doubt my intentions. If you doubt me, you're distracted. If you're distracted, you make mistakes. If you make mistakes—" "He gets the ranch," William said. "Or he gets you to push me out," she said. "And then the valley sees that you couldn't hold your own household together, and that makes you weaker, and Grayson gets the ranch anyway through the legal challenge." William looked at her. "You've been thinking about this." "I've been thinking about this since the day he rode up and sat in your chair." He was quiet for the long moment. Then he said, "What do you think he does next?" "He needs something real," she said. "Something that looks like evidence. Right now, he only has suggestion and implication. He'll go looking for something harder." She paused. "He'll try to find your lawyer in Helena. See if there's anything in the documentation that can be twisted. He'll talk to who knew my father in Kansas. He'll try to make the story about me into the story about this ranch, so that when people in this valley look at Carter Ranch, they don't see a man protecting his land. They see a man who was fooled by a woman." William's jaw tightened. "He won't." "He might," Charlotte said. "Not because it's true, because enough people want it to be." She folded her hands on the table. "You need to know that going in. Because when it gets worse, and it will get worse, you are going to need to decide what you believe and stay decided." William looked at her for a long time. His eyes held that particular stillness she had come to understand was not coldness, but concentration. The look of a man who takes things seriously and doesn't perform the taking. "I decide once," he said. "I don't undecide." "Good," she said. She got up and went back to the stove. She did not let him see that her hands, when she picked up the spoon, were not quite steady anymore. The thing got worse 3 days later. It came in the form of a letter which arrived at the ranch in the Morning Post, and which William opened at the table, while Charlotte poured coffee, and Lily asked questions about whether horses could dream. "Horses don't dream the way we do," Charlotte was saying when she heard William go very still. She looked at him. He was reading. His face had the tight, controlled quality she associated with the worst kind of news, the kind you half expected but hoped wouldn't come. He set the letter on the table. He looked at it for another moment. Then he said, "Grayson filed." Charlotte set the coffee pot down. "In Helena. 2 weeks early." His voice was level. "He's challenging the Eastern property claim. His lawyer filed yesterday. We have 30 days to respond, or the challenge proceeds by default." Lily had gone very quiet in the way that children go quiet when they feel the ground shift under adult conversations. Charlotte said, "Your lawyer in Helena, he knows about the challenge coming. He knows the challenge was possible. He wasn't expecting it this fast." William folded the letter, set it down, picked up his coffee. A man practicing calm through action. 30 days. I'd need to be in Helena for at least part of that. The documentation he needs. He stopped. "If I'm gone, the ranch." "The ranch will run," Charlotte said. "Charlotte." He said her name with a weight she hadn't heard before. "You already did this once. I can't ask you to." "You're not asking," she said. "I'm telling you. Go to Helena. Give your lawyer what he needs. Fight the claim." She sat down across from him. "I will be here. The ranch will function. Lily will eat. She paused. Go. Lily said very quietly. Is someone trying to take the ranch? William looked at his niece. Charlotte watched him make the decision that parents and guardians make, how much truth, how much protection, where the line is. Someone's trying, he said. We're going to stop them. How? By being smarter and staying steadier, he said. That's how you beat men like Grayson. Not by being louder, by not breaking. Lily looked at Charlotte. Are we going to break? Charlotte looked the 7-year-old dead in the eyes and said, Not a chance. Lily nodded with the decisive confidence of a child who has been given a solid thing to hold and has grabbed on. William left for Helena the following morning. Before he rode out, he stood in the yard with Charlotte in the blue-gray early light and said things that needed to be said about accounts and the lawyer's address and what Tom was authorized to do in his absence. Practical things. Necessary things. And then he stopped talking and looked at her. I don't like leaving, he said. It wasn't the ranch he was talking about. Not entirely. I'll be here, Charlotte said. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he mounted up and rode, and Charlotte stood in the yard and watched him go, and said nothing, because she was very busy not examining what she felt. Grayson came the morning of the 3rd day. He came alone, which surprised her. She had expected the lawyer. She had expected performance, the display of legal power, the stack of documents, the deliberate making small of everyone in the room. Instead, he came alone, and he was polite. He knocked at the front door. Charlotte opened it. Miss Whitmore, he said. Mr. Grayson. She did not step back. She did not open the door wider. Is Carter in? Mr. Carter is away on business. He smiled. Of course he is. He looked at her with the evaluating patience of a man who has done this many times. I wonder if we might speak. You and I. Just a conversation. Every instinct she had said, don't let him in. She let him in. She led him to the kitchen, not the sitting room. The kitchen because kitchens were working rooms, and she wanted him to feel that he was in her territory, not his. She poured coffee. She sat across from him. She waited. You're smarter than they say, he said. People generally are, she said. He smiled again. I'll be direct then. You strike me as a woman who appreciates directness. He set his cup down. The legal challenge to Carter's property claim is real. I have a strong case. The territorial court in Helena will likely rule in my favor, and when they do, it doesn't just affect the eastern property, it opens questions about the original deed that could affect the entire ranch. I know what you filed, Charlotte said. He looked slightly surprised. Do you? I know what it means. I also know you filed early, which means you're not as confident as you're pretending. Men who are confident let the clock run. Men who are nervous move early and then call it strategy. The smile went smaller and harder. I came to offer something, he said. To you, not to Carter. Charlotte looked at him. You're here on a 3-month arrangement, he said. Debt forgiveness in exchange for housework. I know the terms. He paused. When the legal challenge goes through, and it will go through. Miss Whitmore Carter. Ranch is going to become a very difficult place to be. A contested property, uncertain ownership, frozen operations. The man's going to be in Helena half the time fighting a case he probably won't win. He leaned forward slightly. You don't have to be here for that. You came for 3 months. The debt is forgiven. Carter signed that letter. Your obligation is met. You could go home. You want me to leave, Charlotte said. I want you to make a sensible choice. So that William comes back to an empty ranch and a difficult legal fight and no... She stopped. Grayson's eyes sharpened. He had seen the stop. He filed it away. No support, she finished. That's the plan. I leave. He's isolated. He's distracted. He makes a mistake, or he gets tired and sells. I'm offering you a choice, Grayson said. Not a threat. It's both, Charlotte said. And you know it. He looked at her for a long measuring moment. There's another thing, he said. His voice shifted, went quieter, more careful. The way a man's voice goes when he is about to use something he has been saving. The talk in this town about your arrangement here, it's going to get louder. A woman of your circumstances. The pause. Always the pause. It reflects on Carter the longer you stay. People are starting to say that he couldn't do better, that he's settled, that his judgment is compromised, Charlotte said flatly. People say things. People say things because you told them to. He set down his cup. He looked at her without the smile now. You're a smart woman, Miss Whitmore. Smart enough to know when a situation is costing more than it's worth. Charlotte looked at him. She looked at him the way she had been looking at men like him her whole life. Men who used the word circumstances and the word settled and the word sensible as ways of saying things they were too careful to say plainly. She thought about what it would cost to stand up and tell him to leave. She thought about what it would cost to stay sitting. She stayed sitting. Mr. Grayson, she said, I'm going to say something to you, and I'd like you to hear it properly. She folded her hands on the table. My father's debt is settled. My arrangement with Mr. Carter is my own business. The legal challenge you filed is your business, and the courts will decide it. But what you just tried to do coming into this house while the man who owns it is away talking to the woman he employs, trying to use her to break him. She stopped. She looked at him steadily. That's the action of a man who doesn't have a strong enough case and knows it, and I think you know I know it. I was very still. I'm not leaving, she said. Not because of you, not because of the talk, not because of the legal challenge. She paused. When Mr. Carter comes back, I'll tell him you were here. I'll tell him exactly what you said, and then he'll make whatever decision he makes, and you'll do whatever you do next, and the courts will decide the rest. She stood up. The door's behind you. For a moment he didn't move. His face held something she hadn't seen on it before. Not quite anger, something more like recalibration. The expression of a man who has tried a particular key and found it doesn't fit this lock. He stood. He picked up his hat. At the door he turned. You know, he said, I almost admire it. The confidence. He looked at her. But the valley will decide, Miss Whitmore. Not me, not you, not Carter. The valley will decide what it thinks of a woman like you holding a position like this. And valleys in Montana have long memories. He left. Charlotte closed the door behind him. She stood in the hallway for a long moment, perfectly still, with her hand still flat on the door. Then she went back to the kitchen, sat down, and let herself shake for exactly 60 seconds. Just that. She counted them. When she was done, she got up and started the supper. Mrs. Pruitt came in that afternoon and knew immediately the way women who pay attention always know. Grayson, she said. He came while William was away. Mrs. Pruitt went very still. What did he say? Charlotte told her. All of it. She used the same words in the same order. She had found over the years that precision was the best defense against the distortions that fear and anger could introduce. Mrs. Pruitt listened without interrupting. When Charlotte was done, the older woman sat down at the table and was quiet for a long moment. He'll tell people you threw him out, she said. Probably. Some will say you were rude, that you overstepped, that a housekeeper doesn't speak to a man like Grayson that way. I know. Are you afraid? Charlotte thought about it honestly. Yes, she said. Not of him, of what happens if it works. If he gets enough people talking, and William comes back to a valley that's already decided, and the weight of it. She stopped. Men can hold out against a lot, but public opinion is slow water. It wears through eventually. Mrs. Pruitt looked at her. You care about what happens to this ranch? It wasn't a question. Yes, Charlotte said. You care about what happens to him. Charlotte looked at the table. Charlotte, Mrs. Pruitt said, in a voice that was more gentle than anything she had said in 6 weeks. I watched that man eat alone at this table for 3 years. I watched him do everything right and hold everything together, and never once let anyone close enough to matter. She paused. Then you got here, and in 6 weeks he says your name differently than he says any other word. Charlotte was quiet for a very long time. It doesn't matter, she said. I'm here for 3 months. There are 23 days left in your 3 months, Mrs. Pruitt said. Charlotte looked up. I counted, the older woman said simply. The week that followed was the hardest and the most clarifying. Grayson's campaign moved faster than Charlotte had expected. He didn't need to fabricate anything, he simply amplified what was already there. He pointed at facts and gave them names. Convenient, calculated, opportunistic. He let the town of Millhaven do the rest, and the town of Millhaven, bored and small and hungry for a story, cooperated enthusiastically. By the time William came back from Helena on a Thursday with a thunderstorm building behind him and news that the lawyer had filed a strong counterbrief, Charlotte had already heard her name used unkindly in 4 separate contexts, had refused 2 invitations from neighbors who she knew were fishing for information, and had sent Jessie into town twice for supplies, specifically because she didn't want to go herself and give anyone a closer look at the state of her face. She was managing. She was very deliberately managing. What she was not doing was not letting herself do, was let any of it show in the way she ran the kitchen, in the way she spoke to Lily, in the work that needed doing every day, regardless of what was happening in the town 3 miles away. William came in out of the rain with his hat soaked and his jaw set, and stopped when he saw her at the stove. "You look tired," he said. "You look wet," she said. "Sit down." He sat. She poured him coffee. He took it with both hands and looked at her over the rim of the cup. "What happened while I was gone?" he said. "Grayson came. The cup came down. Here to the ranch. 3rd day, while you were away." His voice went very flat. "What did he say?" She told him. As she had told Mrs. Pruitt, all of it in order with precision. She watched his face as she spoke. She watched the flat, controlled anger that moved through it and settled into something colder and more deliberate. When she finished, he was quiet. "You told him to leave," he said. "I did." "You told him you weren't going anywhere." "I did." He set the cup down carefully. He looked at the table for a moment. Then he looked up at her. "Lily's asleep," he said. "Since 8. Mrs. Pruitt's gone home. An hour ago." He stood up. He walked to the window. He stood there with his back to her and the sound of the rain against the glass, and she waited because she had learned that William Carter needed the space between impulse and speech, and the space was always worth waiting for. "I know what they're saying," he said to the window. "I know you do. I know what they think about—" He stopped. "About you being here. About why you're still here." He turned around. He looked at her directly. "I want you to know that it doesn't change anything. For me. What they say." Charlotte looked at him. She chose her words with the same care he chose his. "What does change things for you?" she said. He didn't look away. He held her gaze with that complete, deliberate attention that she had come to understand was one of the truest things about him. "What a person does," he said. "What they choose when it's hard. Who they are when no one's keeping score." Charlotte's chest did something she declined to name. "You're describing yourself," she said quietly. "I'm describing you," he said. The rain came down outside, and the fire settled in the stove, and the kitchen held them both in the warmth of it, and Charlotte thought 23 days. She thought it very carefully. She held it up against what she was feeling and compared the two. They did not match. They had not matched for a while. She was only now letting herself know it. She picked up the coffee cups and took them to the sink. "Your lawyer's brief," she said, because one of them had to say something normal. "Is it strong?" "He thinks so." William came back to the table and sat. He was watching her. "He says the flood that damaged the territorial records in '62 is actually in our favor. Grayson needs to prove the claim wasn't registered, and without the records, he can't prove the negative. It becomes his burden, not mine. How long to resolve it? Best case 2 months, worst case 6. And in the meantime, the ranch operates as normal. The challenge doesn't freeze operations. That was Grayson's implication, not the legal reality." He paused. "He lied to you." "I know. I looked it up." She glanced at him. "Tom has a copy of the Territorial Property Code. I borrowed it." William stared at her. "You read the Territorial Property Code," he said. "I read a great many things," she said. "My mother raised me that way." He stared at her for another moment. Then he laughed. It was a short sound, Sudden and unguarded, the kind of laugh that happens when something catches a person off guard, and they don't have time to decide whether to produce it. Charlotte had not heard him laugh before. It changed his face entirely. She turned back to the sink so he wouldn't see what it did to hers. "There's one more thing," William said. His voice had shifted again back to the careful register. She turned. Howe was standing. He had his hands in his pockets, and that particular weight in his expression, the look she'd seen only once or twice when something mattered more than he usually allowed things to matter. "You're 3 months," he said. Her breath stopped. "It's almost up," he said. "I know that. And I know the arrangement was, I know what I offered, and what you agreed to." He stopped, looked at the floor, looked at her. "I want to ask you something, and I want you to know that whatever you answer the letter about your father's debt stands. That's done. That's not connected to this." "Ask?" she said. Her voice was almost steady. "Stay," he said. "One word. Not as a housekeeper," he said quickly. "Not as I mean the house still needs." He stopped. He pressed his lips together. He tried again. "I am asking you badly." "You're asking me fine," she said. "I'm asking you to stay," he said. "Because this ranch is better with you here. Because Lily is better with you here." A pause. A breath. "Because I am." The clock ticked. The rain came down. Charlotte looked at this man. This careful, quiet, decent man who said things slowly, because he meant them, who had looked at her that first day without subtracting anything. Who had said "I know that" about her character, without a single moment of doubt. And she thought about 23 days and 3 months, and all the distances between Millhaven and here that she had crossed without looking back. "I have conditions," she said. His expression shifted, just slightly, the beginning of something. "Tell me," he said. "First, whatever Grayson does next, we face it together. You don't go to Helena without telling me everything. No protecting me from the business." Agreed. Second, Lily gets a real teacher. Millhaven has one who's been retired 3 years. She'll come out twice a week for the right price. Agreed. Third. She stopped. She looked at him. "You said you ask once and you don't undecide. I'm the same way. If I stay, I'm staying. I'm not 3 months at a time. I'm not something you try." He was very still. "I know what I look like to this town," she said. "I know what they've decided about me. I know what they'll keep saying. And if I stay here, I'm staying as—" She couldn't finish that sentence yet. "I'm staying as someone who belongs here. Not as the housekeeper. Not as the woman who's still here when 3 months are up." "Yes," he said. "Yes, what?" she said. "I haven't finished." "Yes to all of it," he said. "However you finish that sentence, yes." Charlotte looked at him. She thought about her mother's kitchen. She thought about the long ride in Pete Hadley's wagon. She thought about standing at the gate with her one bag while the ranch hands laughed, and she thought about walking forward anyway with her chin at the angle her mother had insisted upon, not tilted up, not tilted down, but level. She thought about what it meant to arrive somewhere, and for the first time in your life, feel the ground stay solid under your feet. "All right," she said. Just that. The 2 words, plain and direct, meaning everything. He stood across the kitchen and looked at her, and she stood at the sink and looked at him, and the rain came down, and the fire burned, and the house was very quiet around both of them. And then Grayson's next move arrived. Not through a door this time. Through a window. Through the particular cruelty of something going wrong in a place you weren't watching. It arrived the next morning when Jessie came to the kitchen door, white-faced and breathing hard, hat in hand, and said, "Ma'am, Mr. Carter, you need to come to the gate." They both went. There were 7 people at the gate. Not Grayson. Grayson. Charlotte realized immediately was far too careful to be present at things like this. There were 7 people from Millhaven, led by a man named Dale Pruitt. No relation to Mrs. Pruitt, who was the kind of man who had never had much authority and had learned to borrow it from other people's grievances. Dale Pruitt had a piece of paper. He held it up. "We've got signatures," he said, "from Valley residents, requesting that the arrangement at this ranch be formally reviewed by the town council." He looked past William at Charlotte. There are questions being raised about the nature of the arrangement, about the woman staying here, about the impropriety. There's no impropriety, William said. His voice was very quiet. That's what the council would determine. There is no council, William said, with jurisdiction over my land or my household, and you know that, Dale. The community does not live here, William said, and neither do you. He looked at the 7 people at his gate, at their faces, which were a mix of self-righteousness and discomfort in proportions that varied by person. I know why most of you are here. I know who sent you. And I know that what's on that paper has Holt Grayson's fingerprints on it, even if his name isn't written there. He paused. You've been used, all of you, by a man who wants this land and is willing to use whatever's available to get it, including your good intentions. A woman toward the back of the group 1. Charlotte recognized from church, who had always looked at her with something closer to uncertainty than cruelty, shifted on her feet. William, Dale said. The woman, Miss Whitmore, William said, has my full trust. She has earned it, and she is staying. He looked at the group. I'm going to ask all of you to go home. Think about what was asked of you, and who asked it, and what they stand to gain. He paused. And if anyone wants to talk, really talk, not perform, my door's open, as it's always been. He turned back to the ranch. Charlotte walked beside him, behind them. She heard the group break up quietly, without the particular energy of people who got what they came for. She heard the woman from church say something in a low voice. She heard Dale Pruitt say nothing at all. When they were far enough from the gate, Charlotte said, "That's going to make Grayson angrier." "Good," William said. "He'll try something harder next." "Let him." She looked at him. "You're not afraid of him." "I'm afraid of plenty of things," William said. He looked at her once sideways with something in his expression she didn't have a name for yet. Losing what matters is on that list. He went to find Tom. Charlotte stood in the yard alone. The morning was sharp and cold and brilliant, and the mountains in the distance had the first white on their peaks that meant the season was turning. Everything smelled like rain-washed earth and the coming cold. She thought about what he had said. Losing what matters. She thought about who he had looked at when he said it. She pressed her lips together and made herself breathe evenly, and thought, there is a man in this valley with a lawyer and a grudge and a piece of paper with 7 signatures on it. And there is a legal challenge in Helena that needs answering. And there are 3 families in this valley who need the creek to stay accessible. And there is a little girl in that house who needs a real teacher and a stable house, and someone to tell her that the people who love her are not going to disappear. There was enough to do. She went inside. She started the bread. And somewhere in the back of her mind the word Grayson had used circumstances sat like a stone she intended one day to pick up and throw very far. She was not done yet. Not even close. Neither was he. The bread was still warm when the second letter arrived. Charlotte had her back to the door, pulling the loaves from the oven, when she heard William's footsteps stop in the hallway, the particular stop that meant something had landed wrong. She knew his footsteps the way you learn the sounds of a house you've decided to belong to. She set the loaves on the rack and turned around. He was standing in the kitchen doorway with an envelope in one hand and the expression of a man who has opened something that changed the shape of the room. "What is it?" she said. He looked up. He handed her the letter. She read it. She read it twice because the first time her eyes moved too fast to let the words settle. It was from a man named Gerald Whitmore, her father. I was not writing to ask after her. He was not writing to apologize for the 40 miles, or the debt, or the years of putting things down that other people had to carry. He was writing because he had heard from whom he didn't say, but Charlotte could guess the answer, that his daughter was living at Carter Ranch under an arrangement that he as her father found deeply troubling. He was writing to inform William Carter that he intended to come to Millhaven to assess the situation, that he had concerns about his daughter's well-being and reputation, that he believed a formal conversation was necessary. The letter was written in the careful, respectable hand of a man who had drunk himself through 3 properties and a marriage, and had somehow preserved through all of it the ability to sound reasonable on paper. Charlotte folded the letter. She set it on the table. "He didn't write to me," she said. "He wrote to you." Yes. Because writing to you positions him as the concerned father protecting his daughter's honor. Writing to me would just be my father writing to me. William looked at her steadily. Grayson got to him. Obviously. She pressed her palms flat on the table. Breathed. My father is not a cruel man. I want you to understand that. He's a weak man. There's a difference. And weak men are easy to move if you know which direction they want to go already. She paused. He wants to feel like a father. He wants to feel like he's doing something righteous. Grayson handed him a way to do that, and my father took it because it cost him nothing and made him feel large. What do you want to do? William said. She looked at him. The question still surprised her the way he asked it. Not what should we do? Not what do you think he'll do, but what do you want? As if her want was the first thing to establish. I want to handle it, she said. I want to talk to him before he arrives and before he says anything to anyone in town that Grayson can use. She paused. Can I have the wagon tomorrow? I'll take you, William said. You don't have to. I know I don't have to, he said. I'm going. She looked at him for a moment. She thought about arguing. She thought about the 11 different reasons she was capable of handling her own father without an escort. She thought about what it meant that he had said, I'm going with exactly that tone. Not I'll go with you, which was an offer, but I'm going, which was a decision, and she decided that some things were worth letting happen. Fine, she said. Fine, he agreed. She turned back to the bread. Her hands were steady. She was making them steady. This, she thought, was the thing Grayson hadn't calculated, that she had been making her hands steady her whole life, and she was very good at it by now. They left at first light. The ride to Millhaven took the better part of the morning, and they covered most of it in the particular silence that had developed between them over weeks. The kind that didn't require filling, that had its own texture and warmth, that meant something different from the silence between strangers. About an hour out, William said, Tell me about him. Charlotte kept her eyes on the road. My father. If you want to. She thought about it. She had told the practical facts already, the debt, the Kansas property, the pattern of it. She had not told the rest. I was different before my mother got sick, she said. I know that's what everyone says about their fathers, but it's true of mine. He was not great but trying. He worked. He kept his promises most of the time. He was funny in a quiet way. He knew the names of birds. She paused. When she died, it was like watching a house with the supports pulled out. Everything just slowly came down. And the terrible thing about it was that you could see it happening and there was nothing to do. He didn't want to be saved. He just wanted her back. And since he couldn't have that, he wanted to not feel it. William was quiet. I kept trying to be enough, Charlotte said. For about 2 years after she died, I thought that if I was useful enough and capable enough and present enough, it would fill something. Give him a reason. She looked at her hands in her lap. It doesn't work that way. A person has to want the reason. You can't want it for them hard enough to make it take. You were 17, William said. 18 by the time I stopped trying. She said it without self-pity. Just information. The way you state the weather that happened years ago on a day you remember. And you've been managing him since. Managing the consequences of him. There's a difference. William looked at the road. You shouldn't have had to. No, she agreed. But I did, and it taught me things. She glanced at him. How to read a room before I walk into it. How to know what a person actually needs versus what they say they need. How to keep a house running when the person who's supposed to be running it isn't. She paused. It also taught me that I don't want to spend my life waiting for someone to finally decide I'm worth staying sober for. The wagon moved through the morning. For what it's worth, William said you are. She looked at him. He was watching the road. His jaw was set in the way it got when he had said something true and was letting it stand without decoration. Charlotte looked at the road too. She said nothing. She didn't need to. They found her father at the boarding house on the east end of Millhaven, which was where men of Gerald Whitmore's particular circumstances ended up when their circumstances had come sufficiently apart. He was in the common room when they arrived, and he stood up when Charlotte walked in, and had the expression of a man who has been rehearsing an emotion and is now uncertain whether he's performing it correctly. "Charlotte," he said. "Papa." He looked at William behind her. Something moved across his face. Complicated, layered, the particular shame of a man who knows he has done wrong and is trying to find a framing in which he is still the righteous one. "You must be Carter," he said. "I am," William said. He shook the man's hand with the formal care of someone managing something fragile. "Mr. Whitmore." They sat. Charlotte looked at her father. He was thinner than when she'd left. He had the look of a man who was not eating regularly, which meant the money was going somewhere else. She felt the old familiar pull, the instinct to fix, to manage, to smooth, and she let it pass through her without acting on it. "You got our letter," she said. "I got a letter from a man named Grayson," he said. "He came to see me 3 weeks ago. Said he was concerned about you." "He's concerned about the ranch," Charlotte said. "He wants to buy it. My being here makes it harder for him to do that, so he came to you." Her father blinked. He said whatever would move you," Charlotte said, not unkindly. "He's good at that. What did he tell you? That I was in a compromised position, that my reputation was suffering, that as my father, you had a responsibility?" Gerald Whitmore looked at the table. His hands, she noticed, were not quite still. "He said people were talking," her father said. "About you living at a man's ranch, unmarried." He said. He stopped. He looked at William with something that was trying to be protective anger and landing closer to helplessness. "He said it didn't look right." "Papa." Charlotte leaned forward. "I want you to listen to me. I know that's hard sometimes. I know you have a picture in your head of why I'm here and what it means and what kind of woman that makes me. I know Grayson gave you that picture very carefully." She paused. "I'm going to give you a different one, the true one," she told him. The arrangement, the work, the legal challenge, the debt letter which she had brought folded in her pocket and which she set on the table in front of him now. She told him about the Calders and the Murdochs and the families in the valley. She told him about Lily because she wanted him to understand the shape of what she had built here. She told him about Grayson coming to the ranch while William was away, and what she had said and what she had chosen. Her father read the debt letter twice. His jaw worked. "He came to me," Gerald said slowly, because he knew you'd come here," Charlotte said, "and that your coming here would embarrass William publicly, would make it look like my family had objections, would give the people who are already talking something more to say." She looked at him steadily. "He used you, Papa, the way he uses everyone. He found the place where you wanted to feel like a father, and he pushed." The room was very quiet. Gerald Whitmore looked at his daughter. He looked at the debt letter with his name on it. He looked at William Carter, who had said nothing throughout any of this, and who was, Charlotte noted, doing it with the particular quality of a man who knows that silence is sometimes the most respectful thing you can offer. "You're not coming home," Gerald said. It wasn't an accusation. It was something older and more honest than that, the recognition of a man who has understood perhaps for the first time that the daughter he sent out to manage his consequences has somewhere better to be. "No," Charlotte said. He nodded slowly. Once. The nod of a man receiving information and deciding to believe it, even though it cost him something. "This man," he said without looking at William, "he's treating you right." "Yes," Charlotte said. "He knows what he's got." Charlotte felt something catch in her chest. She didn't look at William. "He's getting there," she said. Her father picked up the debt letter. He folded it. He handed it back to her. "Keep it," he said. "You earned it." It was the most her father had given her in years. It was not enough. It was also, she knew, the most he had. She took the letter. She folded it back into her pocket. "Don't go to the town council," she said. "Don't talk to Grayson again. Whatever he offers you." "I know," her father said. "I know what men like that offer." He looked at his hands. "I've taken enough of it." They left him in the commune, and Charlotte walked out into the Millhaven morning with the particular feeling of a thing that has been finished, not resolved, not healed, but finished the way a door can be closed without being locked. William walked beside her. He did not say anything until they reached the wagon, and then he said, "You all right?" Yes, she said. Honest answer. She looked at him. I'm better than I expected to be, she said. That's the honest answer. He helped her up to the wagon seat. He got up beside her. He picked up the reins. He's not a bad man, Charlotte said more to the air than to him. He's just not enough. Not for what he was asked to be. Most people aren't, William said. Doesn't make them bad, just makes them limited. Charlotte looked at him. You believe that? I've met enough people to believe most of them are doing about as well as they know how, he said. The ones worth worrying about are the ones who know better and choose worse anyway. He paused. That's not your father. That's Grayson. She sat with that. They were 2 miles from Millhaven when the rider came toward them on the road, fast, too fast for a casual afternoon ride, with the urgency of someone carrying news that couldn't wait. It was Jesse. He pulled up hard. His horse danced under him. His face was white. What happened? William said. The north fence, Jesse said, breathing hard. Someone cut it. The cattle are out on the Grayson side of the line. If they're on that property when he calls the surveyor. William looked at Charlotte. 1 second. She saw the calculation happening. Go, she said. He handed her the reins. He got on Jesse's horse. He looked at her once more, something in his face she didn't have time to interpret, and then he was riding hard back toward the ranch. Charlotte picked up the reins. She turned the wagon. She followed. She drove faster than was entirely sensible, and arrived at the ranch 20 minutes after William to find the yard alive with the controlled chaos of men moving with purpose. Tom was already at the north fence with 2 hands. Jesse was coordinating the cattle drive back. William was on a fresh horse directing from the middle of it, and she could see from 40 yards away that he already knew exactly what had happened and who had done it. She put the wagon away herself. She went inside. She found Mrs. Pruitt in the kitchen. How bad? Charlotte said. Could have been worse. Tom thinks 15 head crossed the line. They got 12 back already. Mrs. Pruitt was cutting something with the focused energy of a woman displacing worry into useful action. But the surveyor was already there. Grayson called him in this morning, before the fence was cut. Charlotte went still. The surveyor was there before. Yes. Which means Grayson knew the cattle would be there, Mrs. Pruitt said. Which means someone cut that fence on Grayson's instruction, and the surveyor was already in place to document the trespass. Charlotte felt the shape of it. Clean and cold and deliberate. He's going to file a trespass claim, she said. Against the legal challenge. He's building a counter-argument that Carter Ranch is operating outside its boundaries, and if he can show trespass on the disputed property, he complicates the counter-brief, Mrs. Pruitt said grimly. Yes. Charlotte sat down. She thought. She thought fast. The surveyor, she said. He was hired by Grayson. Yes. Which means his documentation is Grayson's documentation. But a surveyor is a licensed official. His records are filed with the territorial office. She looked up. If we file our own survey request today before the day's out, and the 2 surveys document the same positions, Grayson loses the ability to claim our survey is self-serving, Mrs. Pruitt said slowly. And if the cattle are already back on our side, there's nothing to document on his side. They looked at each other. Who rides fastest? Charlotte said. Jesse, but he's at the fence. Who's second? Daniel. Young hand, been here 4 months. Get Daniel, Charlotte said. I need him to ride to the county surveyor's office and file an independent survey request for the north boundary of Carter Ranch. Today, before close of business. She was already moving to the desk in the corner where William kept the property documents. I'll write the request. He takes it and rides. Carter didn't authorize. Carter is at the fence keeping his cattle on his land, Charlotte said. I'm in the house keeping his paperwork straight. Those are both things that need to happen. She found the property documents. She found the right form. She sat down. Get Daniel. Mrs. Pruitt got Daniel. Charlotte wrote the request in the clean, precise hand she had learned at her mother's kitchen table. She used the correct legal terminology because she had read the territorial property code 3 times now, and she knew exactly what was needed. She signed it with William's name. She would tell him and take responsibility for it, and folded it and handed it to Daniel with the address of the surveyor's office and the instruction to ride like something important depended on it, because something important did. Daniel rode. William came back to the house 2 hours later, and before he had both boots off, Charlotte told him what she had done. She told him all of it. She held nothing back, and she did not soften the part where she had signed his name without his permission, because he deserved to know that exactly as it had happened. He listened. He stood in the hallway in his road-dirty coat, and he listened to every word. When she finished, he said, "Daniel, make it in time." He should have. "You read the property code?" 3 times, yes. He was quiet for a moment. "Charlotte, if you're going to tell me I overstepped, I'm going to tell you," he said, "that you probably just saved this ranch." He looked at her. "And I need you to understand that when I say that I'm not talking about the property." He stopped. He pressed his lips together. He tried again. "I'm talking about all of it, what you built here, what you've been—" He stopped again. She looked at him. He was not a man who stumbled over words, and watching him do it now was doing something to her chest that she was running out of ways to manage. "William," she said. "I need to say this right," he said. "Say it anyway," she said. "I'll understand it." He looked at her. The hallway was dim, and they were 2 feet apart, and the house was quiet around them. Lily asleep, Mrs. Pruitt gone home, the ranch settling into its evening sounds. "When you got here," he said, "I thought I was making a practical arrangement. I thought it was clean, useful, temporary." He paused. "I stopped thinking that about 3 weeks in." 3 weeks?" she said. "Maybe 2.5. Something moved across his face that she recognized now as the suppressed beginnings of a smile. "I'm not precise about when it happened, just that it did." "When what happened?" she said, because she needed to hear him say it. He reached out. His hand found hers, not dramatically, not with flourish, just his hand finding hers, the way a person reaches for something they've been wanting to reach for and have finally decided to stop waiting on. His fingers closed around hers. "This," he said. "You. Here. Being you." He exhaled. "I don't have better words than that. I spent 38 years being a man who didn't say what he felt, because there was always something more practical to say. I don't want to do that anymore." Charlotte looked in their hands. She looked at his face. She thought about a girl who had walked 40 miles with her chin level and her one bag, and had arrived at a door expecting nothing, and found this. Found a kitchen that became hers. A little girl who took her hand in church. A man who said, "I know that about her character," without hesitation. "You have better words than you think," she said. His hand tightened around hers. Just slightly. The next morning brought the news that changed everything. Daniel had made it. The survey request was filed. And when Grayson's lawyer arrived at the territorial office in Mill Haven to submit the trespass documentation, he discovered that an independent survey had already been requested, which meant any documentation from Grayson's hired surveyor would be measured against an objective record, and Grayson's legal strategy required ambiguity that the objective record would eliminate. Charlotte found this out from Tom, who had heard it from the man at the land office, who had apparently taken some personal satisfaction in delivering this information to people who asked. She was at the kitchen table when Tom told her. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Good." "Grayson's going to be angry," Tom said. "He's already angry. Now he's also wrong on the record." Tom looked at her with the expression she had been seeing on the faces of the Carter ranch hands for several weeks now, the particular look of people who have recalibrated. "Ma'am," he said, "can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "When you got here, did you know it was going to go this way?" Charlotte looked at the table. She thought about the wagon ride and the gate and the ranch hands laughing, and the man who had opened the door and looked at her face and not subtracted anything. "No," she said. "I knew I was going to do my best. That's all I knew." Tom nodded. He left. She sat at the table and thought about best and what it had turned into. The thing nobody told you. The thing she had not known was that doing your best in a place where it was actually received was different from doing your best in a place where it disappeared without trace. She had been doing her best her whole life in rooms where nobody was watching for people who were too busy or too absent or too reduced by their own troubles to notice. And she had kept doing it anyway, because that was who she was, not because it was rewarded. But this was different. This was a kitchen that carried the evidence of her care every morning. This was a little girl who had learned 12 new things this week from the retired schoolteacher Charlotte had hired on William's behalf. This was a valley full of families who had borrowed the Carter Ranch draft horse and gotten medicine for their children and found water for their wells, and who had started quietly without announcement to see her differently. This was a man who held her hand in a hallway and said, "I don't want to do that anymore." Charlotte was 30 days past her 3 months. She was not counting anymore. The Valley Council Millhaven's informal authority, which met at the church on the last Thursday of every month, called a meeting. Charlotte found out from Adelaide Marsh, who had become something close to an ally over the preceding weeks, in the way that women sometimes become allies after initial hostility, slowly, practically through the shared experience of dealing with a common problem. Adelaide came to the ranch on a Wednesday, and she sat in the kitchen and drank Charlotte's coffee and said, "Grayson's calling for a vote, Valley residents, on whether Carter Ranch's operations should be suspended pending the property challenge resolution." Charlotte set her cup down. "He can't legally do that." "No. But he can create enough public pressure that William's business relationships, his trading partners, the family that buys his cattle, the mill that processes his grain, start to feel uncomfortable. A vote doesn't have legal force. It has social force." "When's the meeting?" "Thursday, 2 days." Charlotte looked at Adelaide. "He's calling this now because the survey filing blocked the trespass angle and he needs a new pressure point." "Yes. If we don't go, he controls the narrative. If we do go, it's a room full of people, some of whom have been listening to him for months," Adelaide said. "And some of whom—" She paused. She looked at her cup. "Some of whom are going to say things about you, in public, directly." Charlotte absorbed this. "And you're telling me because—" Adelaide met her eyes. "Because I was one of the people who looked at you that first day at the gate and made a decision before I knew anything about you." She paused. "I've watched what you've done here, what you've done for this valley." Her jaw tightened slightly. "I was wrong. I don't like being wrong, but I like doing nothing about it less." Charlotte was quiet for a long moment. "Will you come?" Charlotte said. "To the meeting?" "I'll come," Adelaide said. "Will you speak?" A pause. "Yes." "Thank you," Charlotte said. Adelaide looked slightly uncomfortable with this, the way people do when gratitude lands on a wrong they haven't finished accounting for. "Don't thank me yet," she said. "Grayson's going to make it ugly." "He's been making it ugly," Charlotte said. "I've still got bread to make tomorrow morning. Some things don't stop for ugly." Adelaide looked at her for a moment. Then she laughed, a short, surprised sound. "Carter has no idea what walked in through his gate," she said. "He's figuring it out," Charlotte said. Thursday came. The church was full by the time Charlotte and William arrived together, a fact that she understood before she even stepped through the door, would be noted and discussed and used. She had considered privately and carefully whether she should come separately. She had decided against it. This was not a situation for careful distances. This was a situation for standing in the same room and meaning it. William opened the door, and she walked through it beside him. She felt the room shift, the particular quality of many people trying not to stare while staring. She kept her chin level. Not tilted up, not tilted down. Honest and present the way her mother had taught her. Grayson was at the front. He had the assembled posture of a man who has prepared his stage. His lawyer was beside him. There were papers. Dale Pruitt was running the meeting because Dale Pruitt was the kind of man who could always be found running things he didn't own, and he called the room to order with the self-important gravity of the powerless given temporary authority. The first 10 minutes were process. Grayson presenting his concerns about operational uncertainty on contested property. His lawyer providing what sounded like legal language, and was actually legal language, with most of the substance removed. Dale Pruitt, facilitating with deep seriousness. Charlotte sat beside William and listened, and did not speak, because she knew what she was waiting for. Then Grayson said, "I also want to raise the matter of management." The room went quieter. Carter Ranch has been for the past several months under a management arrangement that many in this valley have found. He paused. The familiar pause. Irregular. A young woman living at the ranch exercising a level of authority over ranch operations, and, "What level of authority?" William said. The room stilled. He had not raised his voice. He had not moved. He had simply said the words in the flat, carrying tone that filled space without effort. Grayson looked at him. "I beg your pardon. What level of authority," William said, "are you describing, specifically? Because the arrangement at Carter Ranch is my business, and if you're going to call a meeting to discuss it, I'd like the description to be accurate." Grayson's lawyer leaned in and said something. Grayson straightened. "Miss Whitmore has been making decisions about ranch operations community resources personnel." "Correctly," William said. "Every decision she made while I was in Helena was correct. I checked every one of them." He paused. "Is the complaint that she made decisions or that she made good ones?" A sound moved through the room. Not quite a laugh. Something adjacent. Dale Pruitt said, "Now, William, the concern is about propriety." "The concern," Adelaide Marsh said from the back of the room, standing up, "is manufactured." The room turned. Adelaide was 30 years old and had lost her family's property to this man, and was standing in the church where she had grown up, with her hands clasped and her chin at an angle that Charlotte recognized. "Holt Grayson came to our home 8 months ago," Adelaide said. "He presented himself as a friend and a neighbor and a man of community spirit. He bought our property for 60 cents on the dollar while my father was sick, and our options were limited. He told us it was fair." Her voice was steady and cold as creek water in winter. "Now he's in this room presenting himself as a man of community concern. He is not. He is a man who wants water rights and is willing to use whatever is available to get them, including the reputation of a woman who has done more for this valley in 3 months than most of us have done in 3 years. The room was very quiet. Charlotte looked at her hands in her lap. She pressed them flat on her thighs and breathed. From the left side of the room, a voice she recognized as Mrs. Calder, the woman whose harvest had been finished, whose draft horse had been borrowed, said, "She came to us when Frank broke his leg. She sent help without being asked." From near the window, a man. Charlotte knew slightly as Mr. Heston said, "She's the one who flagged the creek drainage issue on the north properties. Saved 2 families from losing their winter grain." From closer to the back, she hired back the school teacher. "My daughter's been learning again for the first time in 2 years. One by one. Not rehearsed, not coordinated, just true. People saying true things because someone had finally made enough space for the truth to stand up in." Grayson stood at the front with the controlled, recalibrating face of a man whose weapon has misfired, and Charlotte watched him think through his remaining options and find them smaller than he'd planned. "This is not a character evaluation," he said. "This is a legal matter." "Then take it to court," William said. He stood up. "You've filed in Helena. The court will decide the property claim. That is the appropriate venue for legal matters." He looked at Grayson. "This room is full of people who have been listening to you talk about my ranch and my household for months. I want to say something clearly so that it's said in front of everyone and cannot be reported differently later." The church was silent. "Carter Ranch is not for sale," William said. "Not at any price. Not under any pressure. The property challenge will be resolved in court, and when it is, the water rights remain with the land, and the land stays with my family." He paused. "And Miss Whitmore is not a matter for a community vote. She is a matter for me." He looked at the room, at the faces of people he had known for years, at Grayson's face, at Dale Pruitt's uncertain face. "I'd like to think this valley is better than what's been happening in it these past months. I believe most of you in this room are better than what you've been talked into." He picked up his hat. "The land office will have the survey results by end of the week. Anything else you want to know about Carter Ranch's operations, ask me directly." He moved toward the door. Charlotte stood up. She stood up beside him, and she turned and looked at the room, at all of it, at every face, at the woman who had said something in her favor at the back, and the man near the window, and Mrs. Calder and Adelaide Marsh standing with her hands still clasped, and she felt something settle in her that had been unsettled for 25 years. She did not say anything. She didn't need to. She walked out beside William into the Montana evening. Outside he stopped. He let out a breath. He looked at the stars beginning above them. "Well," he said. "Well," she agreed. "Grayson's not done." "No," she said. "But neither are we." He looked at her. In the evening his face was quiet, and something in it was open in a way she hadn't seen before. The openness of a man who has said what he meant in a room full of people and is still standing. "I meant what I said in there," he said. "I know," she said. "Miss Whitmore is a matter for me." He said it again differently, quietly, like something he was only now hearing himself say, and deciding it was exactly right. Charlotte looked up at the stars. The first ones. The ones that came out before the others, ahead of the dark. "You know," she said, "at some point you might have to stop calling me Miss Whitmore." "I was thinking," he said slowly, "there might be a reason to call you something else entirely." She turned and looked at him. I was looking at her with that complete, deliberate, nothing-subtracted attention. "That would depend," she said carefully, "on whether you've decided." "I told you," he said. "I decide once." The evening held them both. The town behind them, the ranch ahead, the mountains and the first stars, and all the distance they had traveled from a doorstep where a man had opened a door and looked at a woman's face without taking anything away. Charlotte breathed in the cold Montana air and felt the ground solid under her feet and thought, this is what it feels like. When you arrive somewhere and the arriving is real. She was here. She was staying. And somewhere in his chest, she was beginning to understand William Carter had already built a room for her without knowing he was doing it, without planning the way you build the things that last. Quietly, carefully, one honest day at a time. She took his arm as they walked back to the wagon. He let her. Neither of them said anything. They didn't need to. The road back to Carter Ranch was the same road they had traveled a dozen times, and it felt in the dark with the stars opening overhead like something entirely new. The ride home from Millhaven that night was the quietest 30 minutes Charlotte had ever spent next to another person, and it was also the most full. She kept her hand on his arm until the wagon turned onto the Carter Ranch road, and then she moved it, not because she wanted to, but because the ranch hands would be awake, and she had learned over these months the difference between what was hers privately and what was ready to be seen. Some things needed time before they could survive being looked at. William let the horses find the road in the dark. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He had the particular stillness of a man who has spent the evening saying more than he usually says, and is now content to be quiet inside what he said. Lily was asleep when they got in. Mrs. Pruitt had left a note on the table that said simply, "Survey confirmation came by rider. Filed and registered. Grayson's trespass document has no standing." And underneath that, in smaller writing, "Well done." Charlotte read it twice. She set it on the table. "It worked," she said. William read over her shoulder. He was standing close enough that she could feel the warmth of him at her back. "Yes," he said. "He still has the property challenge." "He does. But the trespass was his best angle. Without it, the challenge is just a challenge. Our lawyer says it's 50-50 at worst." 50-50 isn't nothing," Charlotte said. "No, but it's beatable." He stepped back and set his hat on the table and rubbed the back of his neck. He looked tired in the way that honest people look tired after honest fights not defeated, just emptied out of the day's tension. "We'll know more in 6 weeks when Helena rules." 6 weeks, she said. "A lot can happen in 6 weeks, he said. She looked at him. He looked at her. There was a charge in the quiet between them that had nothing to do with Grayson, or the property claim, or the Valley Council, and both of them knew it, and both of them let it sit there for a moment longer before Charlotte said, "Get some sleep, William," and he said, "You too, Charlotte," and they went their separate ways down the hall. She lay in the dark and listened to the ranch and thought 6 weeks. A lot can happen. It did not take 6 weeks. It took 4 days. The letter from Helena arrived on a Tuesday morning, and William was already out at the north fence when it came, So it was Charlotte who took it from the writer and held it and felt the particular weight of something that contains either good news or the other kind. She set it on the kitchen table and went to get him. She found him at the fence with Tom checking the repaired sections. He looked up when he saw her coming. He always looked up when she came into a space she had noticed this weeks ago and still hadn't decided what to do with the noticing, and he saw from her face that something had arrived. "Helena," he said. "Yes." He handed his tools to Tom. He walked back with her. He sat at the table. He picked up the letter. His hands were steady in the way that hers had learned to be the trained steadiness of someone who has decided that falling apart is a luxury they can't always afford. She stood at the counter and waited. He read it. He read it again. His face did not change in the way she expected. It went still in a way that was different from his usual stillness, deeper somehow, more interior. "William," she said. He looked up. "Tell me," she said. "We won," he said. She gripped the counter. "The challenge is dismissed," he said. His voice was very quiet. "The court ruled that Grayson failed to demonstrate clear cause to invalidate the original deed, and that the flood-damaged records do not constitute evidence of improper filing. They constitute evidence of flood damage." He set the letter down. He looked at it. "It's done." Charlotte's legs felt strange. She sat down across from him. "Done," she said. "Carter Ranch stays. Carter Ranch." He exhaled a long, controlled breath, the kind you let out when you have been holding something for a very long time. "The water rights are confirmed. The eastern property is confirmed. Grayson has no further legal avenue on this claim." She looked at him. He looked at her. "Say something," he said, and his voice, for the first time in her experience of him, had something rough in it, something not entirely controlled. "I'm trying to," she said. She reached across the table. She put her hand over his. He turned his hand over and held hers. They sat there in the kitchen with the letter between them and the Montana morning coming through the window, and 4 months of fighting and building and holding steady, all sitting in the silence around them. "Lily needs to know," Charlotte said finally. "She does. She'll want cake." Something broke open in his face. The almost smile she had seen a dozen times finally became the real thing. Not wide, not performed, just genuinely there. "She will definitely want cake." "I'll make one," Charlotte said. She stood up. She went to the pantry. She started taking things down from shelves with the quiet confidence of a woman who knows exactly what she's doing and exactly where she is. Behind her, William said, "Charlotte." She turned. Howe was standing. He had the letter in his hand, and the expression on his face, that she had come to understand, was him being at the edge of the thing he wanted to say, deciding how to say it right. "Whatever you're going to ask me," she said, "the answer's yes." He looked at her. "You haven't heard the question," he said. "I know you well enough to know the question," she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "That sure of me, are you?" "That sure of what I want," she said. Which turns out to be the same thing. He crossed the kitchen. He stood in front of her, and he was close, and she could see the scar above his eyebrow that his hat usually hid, and the gray at his temples, and the particular quality of his eyes. When they looked at her, nothing subtracted, nothing withheld. "I'm not good at the words," he said. "You're better than you think, Charlotte." He said her name with the weight he had been putting into it for weeks now, not heavy, but full. Like the word contained more than a word usually does. "I don't want 3 months. I don't want an arrangement. I don't want a housekeeper." He paused. "I want you to be here because this is where you belong. Because I—" He stopped. He pressed his lips together. He tried again. "Because I have been a man who kept everything at a distance for a very long time, and I am asking you to not let me do that anymore." The kitchen was very still. "That's not quite a question," she said quietly. "Will you marry me?" he said. "Charlotte Whitmore, will you marry me and stay on this ranch and let me spend the rest of my life knowing you're in the next room?" She looked at him. This man. This careful, quiet, decent man who had opened a door and looked at her face and not taken anything away. Who had said, "I know that," without hesitation. who had stood in a church meeting and said her name like it meant something to be defended. "Yes," she said. He exhaled. "Yes," she said again, because once wasn't enough for the size of it. He put his hand on the side of her face. Careful, like something he had been wanting to do for a long time, and was only now allowing. She leaned into it. Just slightly. The way you lean into something you have been waiting for without knowing you were waiting. The door banged open. Lily came in at a run and stopped dead when she saw them standing that close in the kitchen with the letter on the table and something on both their faces that she clearly didn't have full context for, but immediately understood was significant. "What happened?" she said. "We won the legal case," William said, stepping back but not removing the warmth from his voice or his face. "And," Lily said, "because even 7-year-olds understand, and when they see it. And I asked Charlotte to marry me," William said. Lily looked at Charlotte. "And she said yes," Charlotte said. Lily processed this for approximately 2 seconds. Then she turned to William and said, "I told you to do that weeks ago." Charlotte burst out laughing. It was the kind of laugh that comes from a place you haven't accessed in a long time, open and genuine and without guard. William looked at his niece. "You're 7 years old. I know things," Lily said. She looked at Charlotte. "Can we have cake?" "Already started," Charlotte said. Lily came and put her arms around Charlotte's waist and held on with the unself-conscious grip of a child who has found a safe place and is not interested in letting go. Charlotte put her hand on the girl's back and looked at William over Lily's head, and he looked back at her, and the kitchen held all 3 of them in the warmth of it. This, Charlotte thought. This is the shape of it. This exact thing right now. The news moved through Millhaven, the way all true things move through Millhaven, faster than you planned and slightly sideways from how you said it, but essentially accurate. By the end of the week, it was known. William Carter and Charlotte Whitmore. Engaged. The legal challenge dismissed. Carter Ranch intact. Grayson left Millhaven 6 days after the Helena ruling. He did not say goodbye to anyone. He took his lawyer and his manufactured documents and his polished patience, and he rode east toward whatever valley had not yet learned to recognize the shape of him. Charlotte heard this from Adelaide, who had made it a habit of stopping by the ranch twice a week in a way that had become something close to friendship. The particular friendship that women build in the aftermath of shared hardship, which is more honest than most other kinds. "He's gone," Adelaide said, sitting at the kitchen table with her cup. "For now," Charlotte said. "Maybe for good. There are easier valleys." "There always are," Charlotte said. "Men like him find them." Adelaide looked at her over the rim of the cup. "You don't seem relieved." "I'm relieved about the ranch," Charlotte said. "About the water rights. About the legal ruling. I'm not relieved about Grayson because Grayson is a type, not a person. Types don't go away. They just find new addresses." Adelaide was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You are not what I expected." "You've mentioned that. I mean it differently now." She set down her cup. "When you arrived here, I thought I knew what I was looking at. A woman in a difficult position making practical choices." She paused. "I didn't see the rest of it. What you actually were." She looked at the kitchen, the evidence of Charlotte's months in it, the clean order, the warmth of use and care. "What you built here." "I had good material," Charlotte said. "You had a cold, empty house and a man who hadn't let anyone in 10 years, Adelaide said. "That's not good material, that's a project." Charlotte smiled. It was a real smile, the kind that belonged only in rooms where you were comfortable. "William's not a project," she said. "He was always this. He just needed you," Adelaide said. "Room," Charlotte said. "He needed someone to make room for the part of him that already knew how to be this. It was in there. It just didn't have anywhere to go." Adelaide looked at her for a long moment. "You love him," she said, and it wasn't a question. Charlotte didn't look away. "Yes," she said. "Thoroughly." The words sat between them plain and solid and without apology. "Good," Adelaide said. She picked up her cup. "He's going to need that. Running this ranch for another 30 years, managing this valley." She paused. He needs someone who loves him thoroughly, not partially, not carefully. She looked at the window. Lord knows I've seen what partial and careful builds. It builds my family's history. Charlotte heard what was underneath that. She let it be there without pushing on it. Your family's history, she said carefully, is not your future. Adelaide looked at her. Something moved across her face that was too new to have a name, yet the beginning of something she hadn't let herself start. No, she said. I suppose it's not. She left an hour later, and Charlotte stood in the yard and watched the wagon go, and thought about the particular way things move in a small valley. How a woman's name can travel and what it carries, and how what it carries can change, depending on who is doing the carrying. Her name had traveled differently this past month. She could feel it when she went to town. She could feel it in the way Dade at the general store had started saying Miss Whitmore, and meaning it differently than he had in August. She could feel it in the nods from men she passed on the street, in the way the woman from church had started crossing to her side of the road to speak, rather than pretending not to see her. She had not changed. She was exactly who she had arrived as. What had changed was that the valley had caught up. The wedding was small. That was what Charlotte wanted, and William, who had consulted her on this, with the quiet seriousness he brought to all things that mattered, agreed without argument. The pastor, a younger man who had replaced Holloway after Holloway, retired to his sister's home in Oregon, performed the ceremony in the church on a Saturday in late October, when the aspens had gone gold and the air had the sharp, clean bite of the season turning. The guests were not many, but they were real. Tom stood beside William. Adelaide stood beside Charlotte, which was a thing that had surprised Charlotte when Adelaide offered and moved her deeply when she thought about it afterward. The woman who had looked at her with calculation at a gate 3 months ago standing beside her on a day that mattered. Mrs. Pruitt sat in the front pew and did not cry, which everyone who knew her understood was the equivalent of sobbing. Lily sat beside Mrs. Pruitt in a dress that she had allowed Charlotte to press only after considerable negotiation, and she held herself with the contained solemnity of a child who understands that she is witnessing something important and is determined to be adequate to it. When the pastor said the words, and William took Charlotte's hand, she looked at him. He looked at her. He had the expression she had come to know best, the complete, deliberate, nothing withheld attention that was the most honest thing about him. He said "I do" in the same tone he used for everything that was true and settled. She said it back. Lily from the front pew said, "Finally," in a whisper that was not quite quiet enough. The church exhaled in something that was somewhere between a laugh and an amen. That evening back at the ranch. Carter Ranch, which was now and had always been going to be hers. Charlotte stood on the porch in the October cold and looked at the valley. The aspen gold. The mountains going white. The particular way the light fell at this hour, red at the horizon, the way she had explained to Lily weeks ago, because her mother had explained it to her. The light travels through more air. The colors separate. Red travels the farthest. She heard the door behind her. William came and stood beside her. He put his arm around her, and she leaned into his side, not because she needed the warmth, though the evening was cold, but because she wanted to, because she could. "You're thinking," he said. "I'm always thinking." What about this time? She looked at the valley. She thought about the wagon and the gate, and 40 miles on a hard road and a door that opened to a man who looked at her without taking anything away. About arrivals, she said. How some of them look like one thing and turn out to be another. It was quiet for a moment. What did this one look like? Like the end of something, she said. My father's debt. My 3 months. A deadline I was walking toward. And what was it? She turned and looked at him. He was looking at her the way he always did, steady and full and true. The beginning, she said, of everything I didn't know to want. He pressed a kiss to her hair. She closed her eyes. They stood there on the porch while the evening came down and the stars opened overhead. One by one, first the bright ones and then all the others, and the valley below them settled into its dark with the particular peace of a place that is tended and known. Inside the house, Lily called out about something. Probably the honey. Probably always the honey. And Charlotte felt William's chest move with the laugh he didn't quite make, and she felt her own face do something that was too large and too full to be called a smile, though it was that also. She went inside. She found Lily at the kitchen table with the honey jar, and no particular guilt about it, and she sat across from her and said, "Give me some of that." And Lily passed it with a grin that was all her mother's stubbornness, and all her uncle's quiet and something new that belonged to nobody else. William came in behind them, and sat at the head of the table, and picked up the honey after Charlotte, and they all sat in the kitchen that smelled of the evening meal, and the last of the cake, and the wood heat of the stove. And nobody said anything for a while because nobody needed to. Later, when Lily was in bed, and Mrs. Pruitt's absence had left the house to just the two of them, Charlotte and William sat at the kitchen table with their cups and the lamp between them, and the night outside, deep and still. "Your father wrote again," William said. She looked up. "When?" "This morning. I was going to tell you after the ceremony. Didn't want it in the middle of the day." He passed the letter across the table. She opened it. She read it. It was short. Gerald Whitmore was not a man who wrote well when he was being sincere. The facility of the language left him when the performance did. This letter was halting and spare the way true things sometimes are. He said he had heard she was married. He said he hoped she was well. He said, and this was the sentence she read twice, as she had read the other letter twice, in the same kitchen at the same table, "I should have been the kind of father you deserved. I wasn't. I'm sorry, Charlotte. You built a good life in spite of me, not because of me. I hope you know that's a testament to you, not a debt to me." She folded the letter. She set it on the table. She looked at it for a moment. "He's not wrong," William said quietly. "No," she said. "Are you all right?" She thought about it. She turned the question over honestly, the way she tried to do with all the questions worth asking. "I'm better than all right," she said. She stopped. She looked at the kitchen. The stove and the shelf of good china that was no longer dusty, and the table scarred from years of use, and the lamp, and the man across from her, and the sleeping child in the next room. "I'm where I'm supposed to be. I don't know how else to say it." "That's enough," he said. "That's exactly enough." She reached across the table, and he took her hand. Outside, the Montana night was big and cold, and indifferent, the way it always was, the way she had always liked it. The sky stretching on without apology, the stars in their fixed places, the world below, having nothing to do with the vast dark above, except to exist inside it, warm and small and real. Charlotte Whitmore. Charlotte Carter now had arrived on a Wednesday in August, with one bag and a rehearsed apology and a chin held level by a woman who was no longer alive to see what the leveling had built. She had arrived expecting 3 months and found a life. She had arrived expecting to be the kind of woman other people decided about, and found instead a man who had never decided anything about her, except that she was worth deciding for. The valley had laughed. The valley had talked. The valley had sent people to her gate with pieces of paper and borrowed indignation. And the valley had eventually caught up. Not because she had fought it, but because she had simply continued to be herself in the kitchen every morning, and at the fence, when the fence needed mending, and at the gate when families came needing, and in the church meeting when the truth needed saying, until the weight of all that continuing finally tipped the scales. She was not the girl they had decided about. She never had been. She was the woman who had walked in through the door and made the kitchen hers, and kept the ranch running, and held the valley together when it wanted to come apart, and who had stood in a church on a Saturday in October, and said "I do" to a man who meant every word he said. She squeezed his hand across the table. He squeezed back. The lamp burned between them, and the night held them, and the ranch was quiet, and everything in it, the horses, the good china, the bread cooling on the rack, the child asleep in the next room, was exactly where it was supposed to be. Charlotte Carter had not been looking for a home. She had walked 40 miles on someone else's debt with her chin up and her expectations level, and her heart defended by 25 years of practice and home had found her anyway. That is the thing about belonging. It does not announce itself. It does not ask your permission. It does not care what the town says, or what your father's ledger looks like, or whether you are the size the world decided was acceptable for a woman who wanted to be loved. It simply opens a door, and it says you've come far enough. This is where you stop. Charlotte Carter was home. Thoroughly, permanently, irrevocably home. And she was never going to leave.